You know what I really hate about the video game industry these days? We don't get every company under the sun with a collection of iconic characters just blatantly ripping off Nintendo's party and sports games anymore. Back in my day, if you had even just a handful of notable characters, you'd immediately start pumping out clones of Mario Kart and Mario Party. It's how we got gems like DreamWorks Superstar Karts, Digimon Rumble Arena, and Shrek Super Party. And arguably the undisputed king of these knockoffs was, and still is, Nickelodeon. Mario Kart clones? Check. Smash Bros clones? Check. Mario Party clone? Kinda. Nickelodeon Party Blast is a bit of a weird one. There's not Mario Tennis and not Mario Super Sluggers to round out the collection too. All we're missing at this point is a Nickelodeon soccer crossover, and we're set. Oh, wait a minute. While a lot of Nickelodeon's crossover games were focused on copying the genres that Nintendo had perfected or just outright invented, what I really loved is that they weren't afraid to do their own thing and just get weird with their crossovers. Like, I joked about them copying Super Sluggers, but Nick's baseball game is a genuine crossover with MLB. That is insane. So today I'm going to look back on the weird world of Nickelodeon crossover games and try to rank all of them from best to worst. As a side note, I won't be covering the Nicktoons Unite games as I've already done that in a gigantic video which I highly recommend you check out after this one. But first, if you're obsessed with nostalgic licensed video games from the late 90s and early 2000s like me, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a video. Seriously, like 90% of you guys aren't subscribed yet. Just hit the subscribe button so you're not a slave to the algorithm. And make sure you leave a comment below letting me know what kind of Nickelodeon crossover game you'd love to see next. With the release of Dice of Destiny, it's clear Nick crossovers are still well and truly alive, so let me know what's on your wish list. But enough with that, let's get to ranking every Nickelodeon crossover game. I think it's pretty safe to say that kart races really emerged as a genre during the PS1 and Nintendo 64 era. Sure, there was Super Mario Kart on the SNES, but Mario Kart 64 and Crash Team Racing really elevated the genre to new heights. The PS1 version of Nicktoons Racing is, naturally, a lot more flashy than its handheld counterpart. The game actually kicks off with a 2D animated cutscene to provide some story and background for why these characters are racing. It's totally not necessary, but I did enjoy seeing this, even if it was only brief.
Good afternoon, Nickelodeon fans and sports fans everywhere! As you can see, we're nearly ready for the first race in this exciting series. Now, we just await the arrival of our mysterious host.
The mysterious mystery rider has invited a bunch of Nicktoons characters to compete against him in a race. It's not a super original idea, but again, I like that they have included something like this. Probably the most disappointing part of the cutscene is the animation style. It's very underwhelming and feels very cheap. Once you've pushed past the opening, you'll land in the menu and find that the game is set to easy difficulty with no ability to change it. Some more exploration reveals that there are 4 game modes to choose from. Cups, which are your main single player content, Time Trial, Race for Fun, and Relay. You'll also want to rip your ears out due to this excruciating bouncing sound effect they used in the menus. Stuff like this always baffles me. Clearly they QA tested this game, because there are like literally 0 bugs here. Yet, despite that, somebody looked at this and said, yep, that's totally not annoying at all. Keep it in the game. The roster for a crossover game like this is one of the most important aspects, yet it's constantly the area where developers fall down the most. Where does Nicktoons Racing on the PS1 stand? Well, it's pretty good. There are 13 characters overall. These are Tommy, Angelica, Arnold, Helga, Eliza, Darwin, Cat and Dog together, Dag and Norbert together, SpongeBob, Patrick, Ickis, Stimpy, and the mystery rider who's locked at the start. I can't fault that roster too much. The most obvious snub here is Rocko's Modern Life, which I'm really surprised isn't here in any capacity. Considering when this game came out, it's also a little disappointing that Rocket Power and As Told by Ginger aren't represented. Particularly As Told by Ginger, which is a super underrated show from the glory days of Nick that didn't even receive a PC game at minimum. With this game coming out in September of 2001, you could probably make an argument for Invader Zim or Fairly Odd Parents making the cut, but considering how recent those shows were, I can let it slide. Visually, I think the models all look pretty good. Ooh yeah, except for Eliza, she definitely drew the short straw for this game. Once you've picked your racer, it's time to take your kart for a spin. Yes, we all want a huge roster, plenty of tracks, and big heaping spoons of fan service in these crossover games, but I'd honestly trade a lot of that just to have the game play well. Nicktoons Racing on the PS1 is pretty competent when it comes to the driving. Controls are standard. X accelerates, square brakes, R2 performs a jump drift, although this doesn't give you a boost or anything, and L1 will fire off your weapons. Zipping around tracks feels decent. The steering is a tad touchy, and I actually found that controlling the game felt a little better using the D-pad instead of the sticks, but overall, it's not awful to control. The problems with the gameplay mostly come from more periphery aspects. Hitting walls bothered me the most. Yes, doing this should penalise the driver, but in Nicktoons Racing it's such a big deal because it spins you out ridiculously. Just nicking a wall should slow me down a bit, not send my kart into a death spiral. The same thing applies to getting hit by a hazard or a weapon from another racer. Yes, this should penalise the driver too, but the amount of time you're forced to wait before driving again is insane. Everybody's had those classic rage moments in Mario Kart where you're going along nicely, but all of a sudden hell rains down from above and you're hit by like 5 items consecutively. Here, if that happens to you, you might as well just quit the game because it'll be roughly 6 years before they give you back control of your kart. Most of the items you'll be picking up in races are stock standard things you've seen in Mario Kart or other races. A big chunk of them do feel like they're just some variation of the banana peel, but the devs do bring quite a lot of unique ideas to the table, some of which you'd see brought to life in Mario Kart games down the line. I always love seeing this in non-Mario Kart karting games. It's nice to know that Nintendo isn't the be-all and end-all of this genre. As we've seen in countless kart races, there are other things to pick up outside of item boxes. This second collectible dotted around tracks allows you to go faster, but in a slightly tweaked format to what you're probably used to. Instead of giving you a higher top speed based on how many you've collected, collecting these little orbs will fill a meter at the top of the screen. This is your boost meter that can be activated by pressing R1. It's a fun little addition to the gameplay, but I really dislike the fact that your meter starts to drain if you're not using it. To me, much of the fun and strategy of a gimmick like this is utilising your boost at the right time. Heck, it would have helped negate the issues I had with the long wait time after being hit by a hazard. Instead, there's no strategy here. As soon as your meter fills slightly, just slam down that button. Like I mentioned earlier, competing in cups is the main gameplay mode for single player. There are 3 unique cups to compete in, each consisting of 4 different tracks. As you could probably guess, you're forced to start on easy mode, and by beating all of the cups you unlock the higher difficulty modes. It's sort of trying to be like Mario Kart's CC format, but the problem is the higher difficulties don't increase your kart speed like Mario Kart. For me, that increase in speed is what makes advancing through these different tiers and replaying tracks over and over a fun experience. Here, there isn't a whole lot of enjoyment in replaying the tracks purely with a slightly smarter AI. The cup gameplay also manages to hit on one of my biggest pet peeves. If you finish low enough in a race, the game won't let you progress. I'm just confused why so many kart races do this. It's a multi-race cup. Who gives a flying f*** if I come last in one race? The whole point of a cup is that you get points based on where you finished, meaning I could theoretically come last in the first race, but do so well in the next 3 that I still win the whole thing. Instead, they just gatekeep you here and force you to finish highly. But then in one race I finished last, and the game allowed me to continue, so who knows what the hell is going on here. As you play through the cups on easy difficulty for the first time, you'll probably discover that it's anything but easy. Most of this difficulty stems directly from some of the most outrageous rubber banding I have ever seen. It means that in literally every race, you're never truly down and out, no matter how bad you're going. While this seems good on the surface, it makes winning races unbelievably hard. Like, look at this race I had on one of Ren and Stimpy's tracks. I was first literally the entire race, got hit by one item at the finish line, and ended up finishing 3rd. It feels like there's absolutely no benefit of racing well because you're never able to build some sort of lead. In Mario Kart, you'll constantly have blue shells and the like pegging you back, but it's also totally possible to build up sizable leads that don't immediately disappear due to one hit. Playing through the easy cups, I had absolutely no desire to experience this game on higher difficulties. My DualShock would be in a million pieces if I had to deal with the rubber banding on hard. Additionally, it feels like the AI has an unfair advantage. So often they're able to take corners at full speed, which just isn't possible for a human player. It genuinely feels like I'm being held back and have been given a kart that's harder to race than my competition. The tracks in this version are pretty good. There are 12 of them here, which I think is a solid amount for the time, and a number of them really pay homage to their shows. I really like the first Ren and Stimpy track that references a number of different episodes. On the flip side, this Hey Arnold track is a nightmare. Good luck trying to drive smoothly for even 5 seconds on this thing. Jumping into the modes that aren't the cups, first up we have Time Trial. Obviously this is self-explanatory. It's a bare bones time trial mode where no items are present, not even boost items. The boost meter is completely gone too, just in case this mode wasn't bland enough. It's purely about driving, which you'll be bored of about 2 laps in. The other mode is Relay, which tries to be unique, but is a failure. Here you pick a crew of 3 different races, alternating between them after each lap. It seems cool on the surface, but there's really no point to this mode. Firstly, picking a crew of characters seems pointless, because as far as I can tell, the characters in this game don't have stats or anything. There's no depth to who you pick, other than selecting your favourites. There could be some really unique strategy about balancing your team and choosing the right racer for the right lap, but none of that is present. And because of the limited roster size, you race against just one other team in the relay race. Technically, the roster was large enough to accommodate 3 teams per race, so I'm not sure why they didn't do that. Even in 2-player mode, I cannot see this being enjoyable. I think a mode like this entirely relies on the racers having stats. The last thing I want to talk about is the unlockables. There aren't many. When you beat the cup mode, you find out that the mystery rider was Plankton, but instead of unlocking him for use, you actually just unlock the mystery rider car, which is a boring black kart. Such an awful and confusing reward. Beating the game on the other difficulties will unlock 2 modes. A mode where you collect presents while driving around a Hey Arnold level, and a mode where you play soccer. And that's it for unlockables. No new tracks and no new races other than that bland black kart. That's pretty disappointing and ultimately results in you having no real motivation to continue playing. Nicktoons Racing on the PS1 is quite lackluster. The karting controls well enough, but all the extra spice that makes Mario Kart or Crash Team Racing fun and exciting is missing. The rubber banding keeps you in the mix of every race, but it comes at the expense of making winning races infuriating. I honestly couldn't recommend playing this. There are occasional bright spots with Nicktoons Racing on the PS1, but unfortunately there are just way more negatives that bring this game so far down that I almost had to place it in F tier. But I do think there's enough fun to be had for die-hard Nick fans, so I'm going to spare it and bump it up to D tier. The GBA version of Nicktoons Racing also uses the Mystery Rider story. You get a similar cutscene to open the game, and your ultimate goal is to unlock Plankton. The single player game modes are all the same, just with relay removed, and the difficulty modes are locked from the start too. Keeping with the theme, the roster is 100% identical to the PS1 version, right down to featuring just one unlockable character. With this version of the game releasing in 2002, there really is no excuse not to have characters from Rocket Power, As Told by Ginger, Invader Zim, and Fairly Odd Parents. It seems sort of lazy that they just stuck with the PS1 roster, but then again, it's entirely possible that the developers didn't have a say in this decision. You'll also notice that racers have stats here, something sorely missing from the PS1 version. It made picking my racer have much more consequence, and I decided to go with Arnold because he was this game's version of Mario. Visually, I think this is a pretty good looking game. The tracks can become a bit of a blurry mess at times, but I think the races look good and the all-round art direction is solid. As for the gameplay, well, it's very much a GBA kart racer. If you've ever played Mario Kart Super Circuit, you'll know what's up. The control scheme is almost entirely untouched from the PS1 version. The one big difference is the way boosting works. Because the GBA is much more limited with how many buttons it has, using a shoulder button for boosting wasn't possible. Instead, in this game you'll pick up your boost items and then activate the boost by completing long enough drifts. I like this system way more, especially because the boost doesn't just drain away over time anymore, and drifting here actually feels right. Drifting in the PS1 game felt awful, but here it's spot on. It even tries to address some of the more frustrating issues of its PS1 brother too. The long-ass recovery time after being hit by weapons has been reduced, and the rubber banding is not nearly as irritating. In short, Nicktoons Racing on the GBA has easily the most fun karting mechanics of the 3 releases. Its biggest issue is difficulty, or lack thereof. Easy mode is genuinely a pushover to the point where it felt like a massive waste of time. Medium was slightly more difficult, but even then I only lost a couple of races. This system needed to be tweaked because currently the AI just doesn't stand a chance. On a sort of similar note, the tracks are very short. On average, it's safe to say it takes like 90 seconds to complete a race. Even if you're not necessarily coming first in every race, you'll only need 30 minutes to play through an entire difficulty level, meaning there's only about 90 minutes of gameplay. Weirdly, you don't unlock Plankton after beating easy mode. Instead, he's unlocked after medium. I couldn't find what the reward was for beating the game on hard, if there even is a reward, but I honestly had no motivation to find out. If you really want to play Nicktoons Racing, this is the version you should grab. Its karting gameplay is the best, and it eliminates so many of the big issues I had with the PS1. It's also just insanely better than Cartoon Network Speedway, which was also on the GBA. They're not even in the same ballpark in terms of quality. But at the end of the day, it still has quite a number of issues that prevent it from being truly great. Nicktoons Racing on GBA is a tough one to rank. There's not a whole lot to do or unlock here, but the actual gameplay is really good, which is high praise from me because I generally hate kart races on the GBA. I think this one should be in B tier. If the devs had the chance to add in some of the extra Nick shows that had established themselves in the time between the PS1 version and this release, as well as add in some unlockables, this easily could have been in A tier. Nicktoons Racing for the Game Boy Color is a very simple game. The main menu gives you just two options, Quick Mode or Championship. This is pretty self-explanatory. One mode is for playing single races, while the other sees you race through a series of tracks. However, the Championship mode may surprise you a little. Instead of the cup format we're accustomed to in kart races, this is actually quite different. First up, clicking on Championship will ask you how many races, which straight away confused me. Is it asking how many races I want to compete against? How many human-controlled players are going to be in this? After pressing past this and selecting my racer, I was thrown into a race. I proceeded to dominate the first handful of tracks, and then all of a sudden it seemingly started repeating tracks. In reality, the layout of the actual track is tweaked, but the visual design for the track is always the same based on which show it falls under. This is pretty disappointing, especially because in a number of cases, I didn't even realise I was racing on a new track layout. Each themed track has several different layouts, and the goal of Championship is to successfully race through all of them. One thing you need to understand is that Nicktoons Racing on the Game Boy Color is extremely arcadey. It's almost entirely about getting a high score, and the whole experience feels like it has been ripped out of an old school arcade cabinet. As you might have noticed, there's a timer for every race, but instead of counting up like a normal kart racer, it's ominously counting down. This timer is your enemy. It's the goal of every race to make sure you complete every lap before the time expires. If the time expires, that's the end of your championship run. Essentially, this makes the entire game a high score shootout, complete with leaderboard present at the end of your run. I'm also not 100% sure if losing a race ends your run, or if it's just failing to beat the timer. I didn't lose a single race in my time spent with this version of Nicktoons Racing, so I didn't find out. Confusingly, this countdown timer is also in quick mode. I guess it's there to simulate the championship conditions and practice specific tracks, but it still feels sort of weird to have it present. As for the actual racing, well, I'm not exactly sure what I was expecting a Game Boy Color kart racer to play like, but I don't think it was this. Quite frankly, the whole game feels ancient. It feels like an old arcade game from my dad's childhood that he would have showed me on MAME. Pressing A powers your kart, and you'll turn with the D-pad. That's about it here. You won't need to slow down or drift, and power-ups aren't even really a thing here. Occasionally, power-ups will randomly appear on the ground, but it's certainly not like Mario Kart where you're constantly breaking open item boxes to take out the other racers. The items that are here are super OP. There's an item that forces all racers other than yourself to come to a complete stop for what feels like an eternity, making the race a complete pushover. Your kart is also clearly designed to be way faster than the AI. Hit a straight patch of road and you'll end up flying past your opponents. It honestly feels like this game should have been just based around doing time trials, trying to nab the fastest times on each track. Surprisingly, the kart racing controls rather smoothly. The actual races themselves are unbelievably dull and boring, but controlling the karts isn't at all an issue. It's a lot smoother than most other kart races I've played on this channel. I think the biggest issue with the karting is the annoying sound your kart makes when accelerating. It's so obnoxious and you don't have any option to switch the sound off. My major issue with Nicktoons Racing on the Game Boy Color is the major lack of content. First off, this is the roster: SpongeBob, Tommy, Eliza Thornberry, Arnold, CatDog, Daggett, and Norbert. While it's cool to see SpongeBob, Arnold, CatDog, and the Angry Beavers duo make their debuts here, that's a stunningly small cast of characters. There aren't any unlockable characters either, meaning you're genuinely not working towards anything in this game other than a better high score. Tracks are limited in a similar manner. Not every show featured on the roster gets its own track. This feels really strange to me. We get multiple layout variants of every track, but we couldn't have got CatDog and Angry Beavers themed levels. And like I already said, the varied track layouts are negligible changes at best most of the time. Actually, with how simplistic this game is, all of the tracks feel the same, regardless of which show they're representing. Yeah, they have a different coat of paint on them, but every track is just a flat surface with nothing really setting them apart. At the end of the day, it's all just a bit boring and dull, even if the karting controls are competent. Visually, I don't mind the window dressing for the levels, but the characters are god-awful. I played as Norbert in the championship, and it's hard to say he looks like anything other than a yellow triangle. I guess the best thing I can say about this release of Nicktoons Racing is that it's kinda neat from a curiosity standpoint. It's not exactly fun, but the driving controls well enough to make this a slightly enjoyable look at how a kart racer could work on such a console. I don't dislike this game, but there's not nearly enough content to keep you entertained past 30 minutes of playing. If there was a more beefed up version, I could certainly have seen myself enjoying it immensely.
Nicktoons Racing on the Game Boy Color is insanely basic, but it's honestly pretty cool purely because a kart racer on this platform is such a neat curiosity. It won't keep your attention for more than 30 minutes at most, but it's worth checking out for anybody curious about Nickelodeon's video game history. Despite all of that, it's hard to say Nicktoons Racing on the Game Boy Color is anything other than D tier.
So here we are with the second ever Nickelodeon crossover game. Honestly, the game sort of gives off a decent first impression because it's not just copying Nintendo. Generally, whenever any company copies Mario Kart, Mario Party, or Smash Bros, they copy literally everything. Sometimes this actually works decently, but even at its best, you're usually left feeling confused why you wouldn't play the original game when there's no new ideas present. While Party Blast is obviously inspired by Mario Party's success, the structure of the game is unique. Go on Mario Party's iconic boards, and instead you see a system more reminiscent of Mario Kart. It's honestly quite interesting. So once you jump into the game, you have 3 modes: Blast, Replay, and Cup Challenge. I'll dissect those modes a little bit later. For now, let's see what minigames they have in store for us. Red flags immediately shoot up here. There are 5 minigames total in Nickelodeon Party Blast. I'm honest to God in shock. Maybe I could accept this on the GBA or even the PS1, but a PS2 minigame title having just 5 different games? What the hell, guys? Fun fact, Mario Party 4 came out 9 days before Party Blast. 9 days!
9!
That game had 60 unique minigames, just a teensy bit more. I guess I'll spotlight each of them individually, seeing as there's only 5 of them. The game doesn't actually give each event a name, so I've decided to name them myself. First up is what I've dubbed Food for Fort. As my name suggests, this is a food fight. Players are dropped in an arena and given a smattering of unique food items to pick up and douse their enemies with. The food ranges from stuff that can be thrown to ranged source weapons and breadsticks you can thwack opponents with. At the briefest of glances, this isn't the worst thing ever. I've seen this idea executed much worse in both the Johnny Bravo game and the Camp Lazlo game. The goal of this event is to bring your opponent's health to 0, but you also have a time limit, so often the round ends up being decided by whoever has the most health remaining. The major problem with this game is the fact that, well, actually playing it is the worst possible strategy if you want to win. I know, right? It sounds crazy. Across my many games of Food for Fort, I found that actually picking up food and fighting the opponents just resulted in it being a crapshoot of whether I'd do well or not. However, if I just hid off in a corner somewhere, the enemies would leave me alone, deciding to kill each other and leaving me the victor. This was taken up a notch when I discovered several hiding places where the AI just couldn't get me. Not because they physically couldn't reach me, I was using normal in-game methods to get to these spots, but the AI is just so poorly programmed that it has no idea what to do. In the Rugrats themed level, I would just jump on top of the fridge and sit there for a few minutes. Guaranteed first place every single time. My advice for any lost souls who decide to pick up this game is to never engage during this minigame. It's not worth it. I think my favourite level was the Wild Thornberrys. Here you can jump up on the iconic Comvee quite easily, but for some bizarre reason the AI is baffled by it. They'll try to get up there and get to you, oh boy will they try, but it's always in vain. Invariably they'll get bored and wander off to kill themselves. I really cannot overemphasize how broken this minigame is. Even just standing on the ground not moving produces better and more consistent results than engaging in battle. Food for Thought is the embodiment of the classic Mario Party gif where everybody charges in and knocks themselves out, except for Luigi who didn't move an inch. This really could have been a fun game, but data design have committed some of the most stunning and hilarious blunders ever to mess it all up. The next minigame I titled Silly Squirters. This is probably the most competent of all the games. It's basically the same as the food fight game in theory, but not broken. You each have water guns and have to spray opposing players to grab points. At the same time, points will pop up throughout the level that you need to make a mad dash for. It's playable, but extremely basic and laughably easy. Third on the dock was Bar Skateball. God, I'm on fire with these names. This is a weird hybrid between basketball and rollerblading. You move around via blade, but the objective is to make successful shots of the basketball. This gets even more complicated in one of the Rocket Power levels that features a hockey goal that you can just throw the basketball into. I think Bar Skateball falls into the same category as our first minigame. The idea seems cool, the execution is horrendous. The game wants you to do sick rollerblading tricks and then shoot the ball. Doing this is supposed to apply a multiplier to the score you receive. Unfortunately, just like Food for Thought, engaging with the intended mechanics isn't necessary. I found that the point difference between doing ridiculous tricks and just simply dunking the ball were negligible at best, especially when you consider how quickly you can repeatedly grab a ball and then dunk. I won my first game of this by 4,000 points, all because I was just focused on scoring as quickly as possible. Maybe playing this with human opponents would result in a better flow and more layers of strategy, but as it stands, the single player experience is just weird.
What the dog doing?
Next up, we've got Laying Pipe. This is just a pipe building minigame. There were what felt like dozens of these on CartoonNetwork.com back in the day. The goal is to build a pipeline from A to B, and doing so nets you points. You can take the most direct path possible to get quick and easy points, or make more extravagant layouts to get more points. The twist here is that your opponents are able to rip up your pipelines, and this fact sees a similar issue arise to basketball. There's no point building an elaborate pipeline because some arsehole will destroy it before you get anywhere near completing it. Heck, you can barely even make a straightforward pipeline. The entirety of Nickelodeon Party Blast is laughably easy in every single way except for this game. You're never given a chance to build a score here. You'll think you're doing well, and then in the space of 5 seconds, every single AI opponent will gang up on you and steal the half a dozen pipes you've put down. To make matters worse, one of these levels has these annoying little assholes that will steal your pipes too. It's just frustration turned up to 11. Last, and certainly not least, because most of the minigames I've already mentioned are worse, we have racing. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't come up with a clever name for this one. As the name suggests, you've got a race here. Interestingly, you get some different styles of racing. There's a blow-up tube race, a snowboard race, and even kart racing. It might be the worst kart racer I have ever played, but it's here. The goal of this minigame isn't to cross the finish line first, instead it's all about grabbing the most coins. Your focus is split between grabbing coins, avoiding hazards, and attacking other players, which causes them to drop their coins. I can't fault this one too much. It's not good, but there aren't any massive oversights that completely break it like most of the other games in Party Blast. Probably the funniest thing is in the snowboarding level where the HUD blocks your view several times. Did nobody on the dev team think it was a bad idea to make the race go this way?
What the dog doing?
That's everything Nickelodeon Party Blast has to offer in terms of games, but I have some more general thoughts on the gameplay. Firstly, the movement is horrendous. There's no weight to it, and it feels so chaotic to control your character. Doing the most basic movements becomes insanely hard a lot of the time. All you can really do in this game is jump and attack, but there's also a dedicated button to bend over. Not sure what I'm missing here because it really seems like this didn't serve any purpose. As you've probably seen, every minigame has a slew of power-ups you can grab to make things slightly more interesting. In reality, like many other things in this game, you can just ignore them. They don't make any difference whatsoever. For me, they were mostly a fun distraction to amuse myself while the game's ridiculous time limit ran out. Seriously, did every game need to be like 3 minutes long? This stuff drags on, which is painful when you've secured victory about 30 seconds in. And lastly, what was up with these letters I can pick up? They spell out goose, which, okay, no idea what the fuck that means, but also not a single time did anybody collect all of the letters for this, so I have no idea what it does. Googling goose reveals that this was apparently a Nickelodeon slime toy. Based on the commercial I could find, I don't even know whether goose was still a thing for Nickelodeon when this game came out. It's pretty confusing and I have no idea what collecting the letters does, but I appreciate such a deep cut reference. So with all of that said, let's have a look at the actual modes of Nickelodeon Party Blast. Stunningly, the structure of this game is baffling. After picking your character, you're flung into a main menu, with the devs seemingly pushing you towards the blast mode, considering it's at the top. However, Cup Challenge is what I would imagine this game is all about. Entering Blast reveals just stunningly garbage gameplay. Here, each minigame is broken out into its own section. You click on one minigame and have to win the minigame in each different level. The levels don't seem to get progressively harder or anything, it's just a baffling setup for this game's single player mode. You'll also be pleased to know that a shitty boss battle has been shoehorned into most minigames here. Curiously though, the boss battle isn't the finale. Data Design Interactive make the weirdest choices. After playing this for a little bit, I was super fucking confused. Surely this isn't the main event of Nickelodeon Party Blast. I headed to Cup Challenge and was comforted to find something similar to Mario Kart, a bunch of different tournaments to play through. There's 8 of these in total, starting off with the random cup. So I played through these, won, and then I hit a bit of a wall. You see, I'd noticed throughout my early Blast adventures that these stars kept cropping up. I had no idea what they did until I hit this wall. The stars are required to unlock new cups. These show up very infrequently throughout minigames, so surely there must be another way to earn them. After all, the final cup requires 150 stars to unlock. Heck, maybe just winning a cup will unlock the next. Nope. You're gonna have to earn those 150 stars the hard way, buddy. This design decision is pure f***ing insanity. At most, you'll have a handful of stars pop up per game. However, you're not going to be able to grab all of them no matter how hard you try, because for some insane and idiotic reason, the AI can pick them up. Why do they need the stars? Piss off, you little shits, I've got a YouTube video I'm trying to make here. I decided, screw it. I'll go play Blast mode and hopefully we'll pick up enough stars to start progressing at least a little bit. And this worked slightly. I got enough stars to unlock up to the 3rd cup, quickly won that, and I mean quickly, this cup only has 3 games in it for some reason, only to have hit a wall again. Am I doing something wrong here? Is the game really asking me to slowly grind 150 stars to unlock all of the cups? Who in their right mind would play these 5 minigames over and over to get there? Unless I'm missing something, Nickelodeon Party Blast is the grindiest game I have ever played, and I've played 4 Rocket Power games. So I played through literally all of Blast, and guess what? I still couldn't unlock the 4th cup through natural gameplay. If I wanted to continue, I was going to have to grind. No thanks. Why would I even bother trying to unlock the cups? After playing through Blast, I had already experienced every game and every level multiple times. There's nothing that a cup could offer me that could be different in a meaningful way. Nickelodeon Party Blast is just a tidal wave of garbage. If you're surprised to hear that the roster and show representation in this game is also terrible, then it might be time to get your hearing checked. Here you can choose from SpongeBob, Zim, Jimmy Neutron, Tommy, Angelica, Eliza Thornberry, and Otto and Reggie Rocket. 6 shows are represented here. Nicktoons Racing on the PS1 represented 2 more shows and had 5 more characters in total, despite releasing on previous gen hardware a year prior. CatDog aren't in the game as playable characters, and instead they act as the hosts. I am 100% sure they did this because CatDog was way too big to leave out completely, but they were too lazy to figure out how to get CatDog's unique body to work in the game. Cat doesn't even have his actual voice actor here, making this decision even dumber. An extra kick in the guts here is that there are several characters that appear as boss battle opponents, but they aren't playable. You've got a couple of Invader Zim characters, as well as Tito and Raymundo from Rocket Power, for example. Why on earth would you go to the trouble of making these characters and then not letting you use them? The game doesn't even utilize its limited roster well either. When you pick your character, you're locked into that character until you back out to the very first menu. The game makes you pick before you get anywhere near to choosing any sort of gameplay. When you do this, the game also seemingly picks 3 random opponents for you to face, and you only face those 3 opponents until you back out to the character select screen again. This is the dumbest design I have ever seen. I think the icing on the cake for Nickelodeon Party Blast are the visuals and technical performance. To put it bluntly, this game looks like shit, and it feels like it belongs on the PS1. Environments are rendered in the most basic way with very little detail, despite them all being tiny. Character models are similarly simple, which is particularly insulting when we've already seen far more impressive models of the Rugrats and Rocket Power characters, as well as SpongeBob. It's almost criminal that the character models in the PS1 Rugrats games are an order of magnitude better. I can't even exaggerate how much they skimped out on the visuals. Just look at when they try to spice up the levels with background characters. Say hi to PNG Carl, Mr. Krabs, and this cavalcade of cardboard cutouts in the kart racing level. With how low budget everything looks and feels, it's a genuine shock to see how brutally long the load times are. What could this game possibly be loading? I'm probably a little bit spoiled these days, considering PS5 games load instantly now. Like, literally any loading screen is going to seem long when Spider-Man Miles Morales loads instantly. What is more egregious is just how many loading screens there are. It feels like the game needs to load after you do literally anything. I found myself constantly scrolling through Twitter, waiting for this god-awful game to allow me to get back into experiencing its god-awful gameplay. Nickelodeon Party Blast is a Nickelodeon Party bust. I'm not going to beat around the bush. This game sucks and there isn't a shred of fun or enjoyment to be found here. Without a doubt, it's the worst minigame collection I've played. It makes Cartoon Network Block Party look like prime Mario Party. I can't get over how stupid Data Design Interactive is. Usually I wouldn't go this hard on developers considering they're usually trying their best, but seeing as they've proven to be lazy hacks through their constant reskinning, I don't really feel bad doing it here. A great example of their stupidity when it comes to design is in the boss battle for the race segment of Blast Mode. Here you snowboard against Raymundo and Tito, except you only face one of them at a time, and each time they take damage, they tag out. This brings with it a separate point score for each of them, which makes winning this game a breeze as your opponents are essentially only playing half a level. I would wager you could put the controller down in this segment and not do a single thing, and still win comfortably. Don't play this game. Nickelodeon Party Blast is a dumpster fire, and not in the fun way. This isn't like Superman 64 or Sonic 06 or any of those iconic bad games that end up falling into the so bad it's good category. What we have here is a terrible game made by an even worse developer. Nickelodeon fans deserve so much better.
What more can I say? Nickelodeon Party Blast is genuinely one of the worst games I have ever played. I've never played a game that is more deserving of an F tier ranking than this. Nicktoons Basketball doesn't make the greatest first impression. When you boot it up, you're hit with this cutscene that is a terrifying mishmash of art styles. Once you make it past that awkward start, you're thrown into a pretty basic menu with not a whole lot to choose from. There's 3 main options: 1 player, 2 player, and Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame is where the game keeps a record of stats and things like that. As you jump into single player mode, you get another 3 options. Gimme the Game, which automatically selects 2 random teams to play on a random court. Exhibition, which is the single match mode where you get a choice over who you play as and where you play. And then Season, which unsurprisingly is a full season mode where your goal is to win the championship. With no tutorial in the game, I thought I better play a few random exhibition matches to get my bearings, which is definitely needed because unsurprisingly for a crossover Nicktoons game, this isn't just a straightforward basketball game. I mean, just looking at the game's default rules will alert you to that. Quarters are 2 minutes in length, there's no shot clock, no fouls, and you can't be called for out of bounds. It's basically every man for himself out there. I played my very first game under these exact rules, and yeah, it's safe to say this is the worst way to play Nicktoons Basketball. I'll touch on that more later. Once I'd selected my team, the game genuinely surprised me with a screen where I could tweak my strategy for the upcoming game. Not only can you adjust your lineup, every team in the game has 4 players with matches being 3v3 on court, but the game also offers a best pick button that will tweak your lineup based on the opposing team, and then you can even adjust the traits of each player on offense and defense. On offense, each player can be set to normal, frantic, or relaxed, while on defense, players can be normal, tight, or loose. I'll be honest, I really didn't experiment with this too much because this game definitely doesn't require strategy, but I can't imagine why anybody would want any of their players playing loose defense. Maybe it's a poorly worded way to determine how aggressive they are, like maybe tight means they're going to be swiping at opposing players and trying to steal the ball constantly. Once I selected my poorly thought out strategy, it was onto the court to show off some good old fashioned fundamentals, playing basketball the way it was truly meant to be played.
Basketball is my favorite sport. I like the way they dribble up and down the court, just like I'm the king on the microphone. So it's Dr. J and Moses Malone.
When it comes to gameplay here, the first thing we've got to talk about is controls. Now, as a huge basketball fan and somebody who has been playing basketball video games consistently since like the early 2000s, the buttons used and the way a basketball game controls has really been set in stone for quite some time, even when it comes to these over-the-top arcadey versions of basketball. Yet, somehow, Nicktoons Basketball was still able to surprise me. There are 2 control options, keyboard or mouse. No, not keyboard and mouse, keyboard or mouse. Keyboard is pretty standard, but pretty much boils down to you controlling movement via your WASD keys and controlling literally every other action with the left shift or left control keys. The real unique option is the mouse controls. I'm only slightly joking when I say this option turns Nicktoons Basketball into a point and click game. You literally point and click where you want the characters that you're controlling to run, and all other actions are just you clicking on stuff. Switch characters, just click on them. Make a pass, click on the player. Shoot, click on the hoop. They obviously wanted controls to be as simple as possible, and they sure did succeed here. Personally, I actually found that the mouse controls were way better, and I played the entire game like that. Once you start wrapping your head around the controls, you quickly discover that the gameplay is shockingly shallow. At least as far as I could tell, shooting is 100% RNG. I picked up on this pretty quickly when I accidentally shot the ball from Steph Curry range in my first game and immediately drained it. As far as I could tell, it was a roll of the dice every time you shot the ball, including when your characters dunk. Oh yeah, these Nicktoons can dunk, by the way, which is made slightly less cool when you're constantly missing them for no fault of your own. To me, it seems like the only actual skill or decision making that factors into your shooting is whether or not a defender is close by and could block your shot. Outside of that, it's up to the Nicktoons Basketball gods on whether your shot goes in. Blocking shots and making steals similarly feels random. There's no timing or strategy to this, just mash buttons and maybe your character will defend well. If not, they might commit a foul, as long as fouls are turned on, which gives the opposing team a single free throw. Because this is a super serious simulation of basketball, you can call timeouts and then make substitutions with your one bench player. Unfortunately, there's not much point to subbing players in and out of games because they're not long enough for characters to get tired. Look at all of these energy bubbles. The most I ever saw any character have depleted was 3. And again, all of the shooting and general actions in this game felt pure RNG and not at all affected by characters getting fatigued. There's really no strategy here and almost no depth. But in my initial few games, while I was learning what Nicktoons Basketball had on offer, I was weirdly enjoying myself, despite how negative I might sound right now. Something about the absurdity of these Nicktoons playing a real sport against each other was very amusing, and it makes me really excited for Nicktoons MLB coming up soon. I think one of my bigger unexpected gripes, because let's be real, we weren't expecting a super polished game here, right? Is that the game just isn't wacky enough. This is the Nicktoons. The game should be full of zany things that modify the way basketball is played, but for the most part, the games are genuinely normal basketball games, especially in your first games that you play. These initial matches also made it very clear that the easy difficulty, which the game is set to by default, is extremely bad. When I went to change the difficulty, I was shocked to find that difficulty is tied to the rule set that is used in games. The hard option turns on fouls, the shot clock, and the ball can go out of bounds. And turning all of these on actually made the game feel way better to me. The one drawback is that out of bounds is called so randomly. Sometimes the ball will clearly not be out of bounds, but the play is called to a halt, while other times the ball looks out of bounds and the game keeps going. Unfortunately, while the game says this is the hard option, I'm 99% sure the game is just referring to the rules being slightly more difficult. The AI's abilities are stuck at the same level no matter what. The AI here is pretty damn bad, and after you start to figure out what you're doing in game, you'll stomp them by like 20 or 30 points every game. I will admit, offensively, they can be tricky to stop at times, especially with, the RNG shooting bullshit, but on defense, they basically allow you to go coast to coast and score every time you have the ball. They're also really prone to just randomly jacking up half-court threes a bunch, and surprisingly, they make a lot of them. Again, shooting here is definitely just pure RNG.
No.
Oh my goodness, Valentine!
No,
Whoa,
no.
That is not the shot!
So I just mentioned that the game really isn't wacky enough. Well, the game's potential saving grace popped up after one of my first games finished. Almost every time you complete a game here, you'll unlock something. One of these unlocks is what I can only assume is a coloring in page for you to print out. This is so specific to PC games from the late 90s and early 2000s, and it actually made me super nostalgic. But the actual unlock you'll care about in this day and age is the special ability cards. You see, you can equip a maximum of 3 cards per game, and they give you insane abilities. Some of these cards will be a whole team power-up, giving you something like improved defense for a period of time, while other cards grant a power-up to a specific character. Each card can be activated once per half. Unfortunately, this system is yet another airball for Nicktoons Basketball. The actual use of these abilities is pretty cool. Like, look at Reggie's card that makes her absolutely cracked out, or Tommy's card that allows him to make a shot from literally anywhere on the court. The downfall of these special abilities comes from the fact that opposing teams cannot use them. So while it's cool that I can do these insane trick dunks that cannot miss, or pull off an alley-oop to a ghost, it's incredibly lame that my team is the only one with access to these powers. Depending on the cards you pick, you're basically guaranteed to score like 10 points without a chance of missing due to these cards. By the end of my time with the game, I had access to a guaranteed 3 from anywhere with Tommy, a timed card that improves 3-point shooting, which kind of seemed like it just guaranteed every 3 would go in, plus a guaranteed dunk. Honestly, if Nicktoons Basketball allowed opposing teams to use these, it might have dramatically bumped up where I rank this game. One glance at Nicktoons Basketball and you can tell it's not a visual masterpiece. It's pretty ugly, and while I did appreciate that the game basically keeps every character in their own show's art styles, the Jimmy Neutron characters can look absolutely nightmarish, especially on the Team Select screen where they look like soulless freaks. There are some nice touches to the overall presentation though. I was particularly impressed by the commentary, initially just because I wasn't expecting any voice stuff in this game whatsoever. This could have been super phoned in too, but you have 2 commentators that, although they just dish out canned sound bites, actually fit in pretty well, and they don't ever become tedious. They also shit talk the foul calls in this game, which was hilarious to hear.
Looks like that's a personal foul.
You also get stats in between quarters, which is another nice touch. I would have loved if they had individual player stats as well as the team stats, but the fact that these even exist impressed me, and it was a lot more than I was expecting going into this. But the whole package gets massively brought down by the frame rate. Even at its best, the game is usually at least slightly choppy, but at its worst, the game turns into a complete slideshow. It seemed like the worst of this was maybe tied to specific courts, but I couldn't definitively prove it. With the gameplay being so simple, It was actually sort of manageable when you were hit with the worst of the frame rate issues, but it's not an ideal way to be playing Nicktoons Basketball. Outside of just fooling around in exhibition matches, the main draw here is the season mode. Once I got my bearings on the gameplay, I jumped into this to try and bring home a championship. Here you choose your team and then play through a 10-game season, although there are way more than 10 teams in your league. Team selection overwhelms you with choice, even though there are actually only 16 characters unlocked from the beginning, which means you get 4 total teams before characters start getting repeated. To flesh out the league, you're given a team with damn near every character combination possible. Naturally, the core teams here are based on their TV shows, so you've got the SpongeBob team or the Jimmy Neutron team. But then you also get a mishmash team of characters from shows that didn't have enough reps to make a full team. These are the Nicktoons All-Stars, and I ended up choosing them because they offered the most unique characters. For the other random teams, they'll often go for different themes to tie the characters together. Like this robot team, which features Jenny, Goddard, and also Timmy's friend AJ, because there weren't enough robots in the game for a complete team.
You're nothing but a wire-back silver number crunching clanker!
Once you pick your team, you also get to select your home court for the season, and then you're into the game and can start grinding through your 10-game schedule. One of the coolest things I found after playing my first game was that this mode tracks your individual player stats and has a league leaders section for you to look through. This game continues to go above and beyond what I would have expected from a random early 2000s Nick PC game. A surprising number of stats are tracked here, pretty much everything you'd expect from a basketball game, but like a lot of aspects of Nicktoons Basketball, it doesn't quite hit the mark with its execution. You see, the game only tracks the stats of games you play, so you can't compare your stats to other players on other teams in the league. It's really not a list of league leaders, because other teams will only get a single shot at playing you, while most teams won't actually play you at all. And the stat tracking is ultimately a little pointless, because it's not like they have a league MVP or any sort of player awards at the end. Neat idea, very average execution. The weirdness even translates over to the season standings, something most people would assume to be a very straightforward feature. The way these work, as far as I could tell, is that the game essentially puts you in conferences for season mode without actually telling you. For all of the teams that are outside of your conference, aka the teams that are not on your 10-game schedule, their season schedules are instantly auto-generated and put into the standings. Because of this, you end up with weird things like you having played a single game, while half the league have played all 10. It does seem like the other teams in your conference update their records progressively, so I've got no idea why they couldn't just do this for the whole league. These kinds of quirks make for a very weird season mode, but ultimately the spirit of a good season mode is still present, where you see a bunch of meta narratives popping in your own head as you progress. For example, I felt like Tommy Pickles could not make an open dunk to save his life, while Reggie Rocket was my GOAT and basically led the league in every stat. And as you're slogging through season mode, you'll have plenty of small stories to tell, like the amount of half-court threes that the saggy bottoms made against me in Game 4 was insane, and it was genuinely making me nervous that they'd hand me my first loss. Other fun quirks included being unable to call a timeout in my second game for some reason, and just the overall fact that opposing teams almost never get called for fouls. This caused me to play through almost the entire season without shooting a free throw, so I almost didn't even realize that you don't get to shoot the free throw. The game just does it for you. Also, after one game I played, I unlocked the Tree Dome Court, but I have no idea whether this was tied to season mode specifically, or if I would have unlocked it after any random game. Same goes for Tax Court as well. While 10 games doesn't seem like a super long season, I mean hell, I used to play through full 82 game NBA seasons in NBA 2K when I was in high school. I cannot stress enough how tedious this game gets, like halfway through season mode. This game is so insanely easy, and I basically just started sleepwalking through matches because I was so bored. It got to the point where all I was doing was jacking up terrible 3-pointers and still winning. Eventually I slogged through all 10 games, going undefeated. After you play your final game of the regular season, the game actually doesn't give you any indication of what's happening. Was I going to the playoffs now? Was the next game going to be the final championship game? Just gotta press play and see what happens. Turns out it was the championship game, and to nobody's surprise, I won it without breaking a sweat. Although I will give a shout out to Jenny, because she went crazy in this game, definitely the finals MVP here, made Reggie Rocket look like Jason Tatum. Winning the championship unlocked the only unlockable character in the game, Tak. If you're not aware of the context at this time in Nickelodeon's history, they were pushing Tak hard. In the lead up to Tak's first game released in 2003, he appeared as an Easter egg in several Nick games, a TV show was greenlit, and he'd go on to make an appearance in Freeze Frame Frenzy, the precursor to the Nicktoons Unite series. Speaking of characters, let's look at how Nicktoons Basketball fares as a Nickelodeon crossover. Overall, we've got 17 total characters, including Tak. These are SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy, Squidward, Danny Fenton, Jimmy Neutron, Sheen, Goddard, Cindy, Timmy, Cosmo, Wanda, AJ, mid-puberty Tommy Pickles, Reggie Rocket, Jenny, and of course Tak. Side note, the Wikipedia entry for this game lists 71 characters as playable. There are also 8 unique courts in the game, or 31 according to Wikipedia. However, of the 8 shows represented here, only 5 of the shows gets their own court. All Grown Up, My Life as a Teenage Robot, and Danny Phantom all miss out for some reason. Danny Phantom and Teenage Robot are especially baffling, as I could easily see unique court designs for those shows. I'm in two minds about the roster here. On one hand, it's actually a pretty good representation of where Nickelodeon was at in 2004. It pretty much covers every Nicktoon that was airing at the time of release, so that's a major positive. However, personally, I want my crossovers to celebrate the entire history of Nickelodeon, so seeing so many iconic shows not get a chance here really sucks. It especially sucks because of any Nickelodeon crossover, this is probably the only game that would make sense for As Told by Ginger representation. The fact that As Told by Ginger has never had a playable character in a Nick game is criminal. Because the crossover is just focused on currently airing shows, it also goes really hard on featuring the biggest successes at the time, which is why SpongeBob, Jimmy Neutron, and Fairly Odd Parents dominate this game for representation. It's like the OG version of what we see these days with Nick crossovers, where like 75% of the roster is SpongeBob, TMNT, and Avatar. Ultimately, I'd say the crossover elements are passable here, although it is pretty disappointing that the roster has just one unlockable character, which pretty much means there's no reason to keep playing this game after winning your first season. Also, the characters have voice acting here, which is pretty insane. Literally every character, except Cindy for some weird reason, is voiced here. It's all OG voice actors too, except for Reggie, who had a replacement voice. Not bad for a 2004 PC game.
Here you go.
Sandy Cheeks. Swipes it. Yours. Pass from center.
Ultimately, Nicktoons Basketball is not a great game. I really wanted to love it, but it's just so extremely flawed. Your first 30 minutes with the game will be really fun, purely because of the novelty of a Nicktoons Basketball game, but that quickly wears off, especially once you're slogging through the season. My recommendation, if you're going to play this in 2025, is to jump into season mode straight away. The game is so damn easy that you might as well use these initial games in your season to figure out the controls and at least make things a little less dull. When looking at the whole package, it's kinda hard not to feel like Nicktoons Basketball is the kind of game that should have been a free prize with a box of cereal. Nicktoons Basketball isn't a complete disaster, but it's a very bad game. The novelty, plus some really neat ideas, boost it up to D tier. For certain players, it might rank even higher if you just go in and play for 30 minutes only.
Outside of the obvious quirk of being an iToy game, Nicktoons Movin's other biggest selling point is the fact that it's a Nicktoons crossover. But for those of you who never owned an iToy or didn't even have a PS2 at all, you really didn't miss out on much. Movin only features 5 different Nicktoons: SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents, Danny Phantom, Jimmy Neutron, and Rocket Power. It's pretty poor, but I can kinda excuse it because the entire project is obviously one big experiment. A gigantic roster of shows was probably unrealistic. Where it really falls apart is how much love is given to each show. In total, there are 13 minigames here, with each being themed to a show. Rather than divide these up evenly, we have a pretty wonky distribution. SpongeBob gets 4, naturally, Fairly Odd Parents gets 3, and the other shows only get 2 games as their entire representation. The SpongeBob love spreads further than just the games, as SpongeBob and Patrick are basically your hosts here. spouting lines in the menus and introducing the various games, sort of like CatDog in Party Blast. I'm 99% sure they got original voice lines here too, at least for SpongeBob and Patrick, because they are constantly yelling stuff at you in the menus. Seriously, please leave me alone for like 5 goddamn seconds.
You're the top of the top's top part thingy. Today's ocean forecast, wet. It doesn't get any better than this. Bikini Bottom rules.
The other shows have their characters saying various lines during their respective minigames, but from what I heard, they definitely could have been ripped from episodes.
Treat them like the metal monsters they are.
As you've figured out by now, this being an iToy game means my actual face is plastered all over the gameplay here. Unlike the Kinect, which mostly did away with this for a lot of its games, literally every iToy game I have ever seen plasters the webcam footage onto the screen. I'm sure there has to have been a reason for it, likely the limitations of the technology at the time, because I genuinely don't think any iToy games strayed from doing this. Like the crossover aspects, Movin is similarly light on content. I will give it a bit of credit. All 3 of the iToy Play games from Sony had just 12 unique minigames, so this has them beat by 1 with the added benefit of being attached to a beloved IP. You've got a single player option where you just play through the games one at a time and chase high scores, as well as a multiplayer option. I didn't play this, but from the looks of the setup screen, it seems to play out in more of a Mario Party or Mario Kart style format. I think this would have been where the real fun was back in 2004. I could see this being a riot at sleepovers like the Wii was, especially because some of these games could handle up to 8 players at a time. But yeah, the single player is pretty bare bones, it's literally just the games. You don't get a story or characters from different shows interacting, with each minigame being confined to the world of the show it's based on. They could have at least tried to give some sort of competitive aspect with the AI and modelled it around the multiplayer. Chasing after a random high score doesn't have much pull in comparison. When you do manage to nab the high score, you get to take a fire-ass photo to throw on your Instagram. Me and the Nicktoons out here like we're about to drop the hottest mixtape of 2022.
Make money, money, make money, money, money. Money makes the world go round.
When you select a minigame to play, you get a short clip from the show it's based on, with the clip always tying into the game at least tangentially. This means pretty much all of the minigames here are inspired by episodes, which is a very nice touch. I'm sure the desire to phone this in and put out some generic minigames is pretty strong for a developer working on a game like this, so I appreciate mass media going through this extra effort. Before I jump into the minigames and talk about them individually, we've got to talk about the overall implementation of the motion controls. Probably the biggest issue with Nicktoons Movin, and probably just iToy games in general, is the limitations of the camera. Even back in the day as a kid playing iToy Play, I'd get annoyed by my inputs and gestures not registering correctly. It's pretty jarring to experience when you come over from a typical controller or keyboard and mouse experience where everything just works. Some games work flawlessly in Movin, but then other times the controls can be janky or so fidgety that you really don't want to play anymore. What's the point of picking a minigame if what you're actually doing plays such a minor part in whether the characters are going to be successful in their game or not? In my brief experiences with Kinect games, I never really had this issue, so I think this mostly comes down to being a classic case of iToy being a victim of having a great idea too early. The technology just can't keep up with many of the ideas developers had to make fun games. What I was impressed by was just how physically intense these games can be. After booting it up and playing for an hour, I walked away being genuinely tired. It felt like I had worked out. If you allow me to humble brag for a little bit, I'm in pretty decent shape and try to steer clear of the typical gamer diet. I wasn't expecting a bunch of minigames where I flail my arms around to test me at all. But a number of games had me puffing by the end, and at the conclusion of each play session, my arms were sore. This was just from playing on the medium difficulty setting too. I'd hate to see what would happen on hard. I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised by this, because in 2007 the Mayo Clinic conducted a study using Nicktoons Movin that looked at the potential for movement-based games, like ones utilising iToy, to help fight childhood obesity. I'm petitioning for all gyms to add a Nicktoons Movin station to their setup from now on. This is the key to eradicating obesity. Okay, let's look at each minigame individually, starting with SpongeBob's section. The very first game presented to you is Bikini Bottom Bowling. Yeah, literally just bowling. It's basically Wii Bowling before Wii Bowling existed. Or more accurately, it's the so-called Wii bowling you have at home when you ask your parents if we can have Wii bowling. This one's really a victim of the iToy's limitations. You don't actually get to bowl here. The only thing you control is the direction of the ball. The game auto bowls it for you and puts it into a random direction, then it's up to you to swipe at some arrows to try and get it into a position for a strike. I will admit I did enjoy playing this one, but it's so laughably basic. It'll hardly keep you coming back for more the way Wii bowling had a stranglehold on society in 2007. The next SpongeBob minigame is Krabby Patty Match. Here, different Krabby Patty ingredients will get tossed in the air and you have to tap on the identical ingredients. This one is actually pretty hard because it is insanely easy to tap on the wrong ingredient and mess everything up. I started out trying to play this genuinely using my peripheral vision to keep track of ingredients and precisely tap on the correct ones. But I was having very little success with that, so I resorted to the elite strategy of flailing my arms around like an insane person, which worked so much better. I think this is how you're actually supposed to play it, because the iToy is definitely not capable of the precision required to play this minigame normally. At least doing this gets the blood pumping. Flailing around had me sweating more than an actual workout. This minigame also introduces the structure that's seen in the majority of games throughout Nicktoons Movin. The game will give you an objective, e.g. match X amount of ingredients in a time limit. When you complete it, you move on to the next stage where the amount required increases, but the time limit feels so arbitrary. At first, I thought you had an overall time limit for the game, so if you complete the first stage really slow, you'll have almost no time left in the second stage. However, that's not quite accurate. It's tied to, in some fashion, to how well you do, because when I'd absolutely dominate a stage, I'd get more time in the following one, but the time limits still seemed completely arbitrary. Then we've got Boating Madness, essentially the exact same game as bowling, but you're in a boat. You're driving along an on-rail section and have to swipe left or right to pick things up and avoid obstacles. Also, try to avoid killing SpongeBob in a head-on collision. I guess there is a good reason why SpongeBob never got his boating license. This game is pretty dull overall. Not even the thrill of murdering a lot of innocent pedestrians can hold your interest for much longer than a playthrough or two. Jellyfish Jam is the final of the SpongeBob themed games and was actually the game used in the 2007 Mayo Clinic study. This plays out sort of like whack-a-mole. Jellyfish will pop up and you have to slap them. Yes, slap them. The game literally refers to what you're doing as slapping. So you're just going along, bopping the jellyfish.
He'll bop me.
All the while trying to avoid hitting Squidward or Mr. Krabs. This incurs a minor penalty in the first stages, but the final stage sees the game's controls being mirrored if you mess up. This ends up breaking your brain as left becomes right and vice versa. Trying to rewire my brain on the fly was a hell of an experience, and I found I struggled way more to adapt to this than in games using traditional controllers that do a similar thing. Overall, this game is a bit of fun, and I'd probably place it at the top of all of the SpongeBob minigames. Hell, this is probably the best minigame in all of Nicktoons Movin. So we move on to Fairly Odd Parents, and the first game based on that show is a big swing and a miss. It's called Magical Mix-Up, and it's literally just an unscramble this image puzzle. Simple stuff, right? Well, no matter what I did, I could not get any sort of control to work in this game. The instructions told me to rub the boxes, which gross, but no amount of rubbing would prompt the game to do anything. Maybe my rubbing technique just needs a bit of work. Regardless, this is just a very simple game, and I can't imagine it would have brought me too much enjoyment, even if it worked flawlessly. Fishbowl Frenzy is also a big fan of getting the player to rub the air vigorously. In this one, cracks are starting to form inside Cosmo and Wanda's fishbowl, and rubbing them magically returns them to normal. Seems simple on the surface, but the game throws heaps of cracks at you at once, forcing you to madly flail around and try to prioritize which cracks are getting the biggest. Cracks get too big, it's game over. I just don't get the vibe that rubbing works too well with iToy, or maybe this is on mass media itself. Rubbing the screen feels so imprecise here, and for all of the games that required similar gestures. And when the gestures aren't working right, these iToy games become downright miserable. Fairly Odd Invasion steps away from vigorous rubbing and instead provides the player with a bit of action. With Timmy placed inside a giant hamster ball, you need to direct him around as you crush robots into 1,000 pieces. It's surprisingly satisfying to do this, And while directing Timmy around isn't completely fluid, destroying the robots more than makes up for it. There are actually a number of power-ups Timmy can pick up here, but in my personal experience, it felt like they were too hard to really take advantage of. While I'm in the middle of flailing my arms around to get to the next robot, it's a bit hard to really focus on what power-ups are on the screen. It's a little too chaotic when my literal body is being used as the game's controller. Next up, we have Danny Phantom's 2 minigames, which are 2 of the worst games in all of Nicktoons Movin. Ghost Catcher is naturally all about catching ghosts. Sam and Tucker are being chased by ghosts, and it's up to Danny to catch them in the Fenton Thermos. You need to try and zap up the ghosts without hitting your friends, because hitting them will push you back in your quest to collect however many ghosts the stage asks for. Unfortunately, the controls for this are so clunky. Getting Danny to pop up and shoot at a ghost is remarkably unreliable. Half the time it felt like the game was just deciding to do its own thing. When you couple the poor controls with the fact that this is one of the only games here that requires precision, well, you're in for a bad time. The only other Danny Phantom game, Portal Party, isn't much better either. It's quite similar to Fairly Odd Invasion, as Danny is moving around an arena trying to defeat ghosts. The way you control your character is different here. You have to touch the outside of the arena, and whatever direction you touch is where Danny will head. And instead of simply rolling over the enemies, defeating them requires Danny to go full Beyblade. Danny is useless in his standard form, but when you pick up these power-ups, he'll start spinning around like Dragoon. The weird touch the outside to direct Danny control scheme is completely unintuitive and makes Danny become the least nimble superhero ever. He's got the turning circle of a Mack truck here. This makes just picking up the power-ups a huge challenge. If you do make it to the later stages, multiple ghosts will come after you and gangbang you in the corner, essentially trapping you. You can always get out, technically, but because the movement controls are such hot garbage, it might as well be impossible. The Jimmy Neutron levels make a much better first impression with the dull but not awful Deep Sea Danger. This is an on-rails side-scrolling segment where you need to pick up power cells while dodging mines. To control the submarine, you touch the arrows on the far right of the screen. If you want to go up, you touch the higher arrows, and if you want to go down, you touch the lower arrows. It functions well enough, but there's nothing of interest here. Dodging the mines is incredibly easy, and there's nothing else going on in the minigame outside of that. Luckily, Deflectomatic is a bunch of fun. Here we have a ball bouncing around. On the outside are a bunch of deflector shields, but they're only activated when you touch them and only stay on for a few seconds before switching off again. It's your job to try and string together a streak of deflections, which devolves into absolute chaos that really tests your reaction time. This is the kind of stuff I wanted to see more of. iToy melds the real life and virtual worlds, so why not test out some more real world abilities like reaction time? It also gets some bonus points just because it reminds me so much of the Barrier Ball minigame from Pokemon Stadium 2. Lastly, we have Rocket Power, probably the most out of place show in this game, as it's the only one that had finished airing at the time of Movin's release date. The first game, known as Hanging Out, might just be the worst minigame on display here. It starts out as a simple navigate through these rings game where you're hang gliding above ocean shores. The only issue is that the controls are so convoluted that I couldn't get my character to get anywhere near the rings half the time. I gave it multiple shots, and every time I felt like I might have finally cracked the code, I'd inevitably go careening off to the side. By the end of it all, I was ready to karate kick my webcam. And the very final minigame in Nicktoons Movin is Rocket Hockey. It's just you playing as a hockey goalie. This is such a natural fit here, but I can't say it was interesting even in the slightest. Your hands take up such a big portion of the goals that I found it so easy to deflect shots. I think a better idea would have been to get the player to take shots at goal, mimicking a hockey swing, rather than having me block all of Reggie and Otto's shots with my eyes closed. In a stunningly short amount of time, I'd breezed through all of Nicktoons Movin's minigames, and could only say I truly enjoyed 2 or 3 of them. A minigame collection is never going to be the most interesting game in the world, but I think with the unique nature of being iToy exclusive, mass media could have played around with some much more innovative ideas. A number of the games here, like the Unscrambled a Picture game, don't do enough to take advantage of the fact that my body is literally the controller. It might be a combo of both the limitations of the hardware at the time as well as the developer in charge here, but regardless, it leaves Nicktoons Movin being an unremarkable experience. There are some genuinely fun mini-games here, But even those fun minigames are something you'd play once and then never return to. Even with the multiplayer aspect thrown in, I can't see how Nicktoons Movin would have much of a lifespan. A lot of the games don't even seem like a great fit for multiplayer. But having said that, I'd still recommend checking this game out. Usually I'd tell you to stay clear of a game I've been this negative on, but Nicktoons Movin is so unique and can be experienced in such a short time that it's definitely worth it. It's one of the only iToy games ever made, and one of the handful of third-party iToy games too. It's a neat little curiosity in Nick's video game history, and a fun look back at how far these types of games have come over the past 20 years. Also, the minigames are arguably better than the ones in Party Blast, so there's that too.
Nicktoons Movin isn't a complete disaster, and it has some genuinely interesting ideas on display. The fact that it's one of the few dedicated iToy games, and the only time Nickelodeon did something like this for the Nicktoons, is playing in its favour. But at the end of the day, the execution is massively lacking, so I've got to bust it down to D tier. Having said that though, this is definitely a game worth checking out purely due to its unique nature. Possibly the most random game in this video is Nicktoons MLB. Now, on the surface, if you read that title, it might not seem too crazy. Mario Sluggers exists, and over the years there have been plenty of arcadey baseball titles. Hell, I grew up playing One Piece Going Baseball on the GBA. Instead, the craziness exists in the fact that the Nicktoons didn't just use the MLB name to slap something recognizable on the box. Oh no. Instead, this is a full-on crossover with the MLB. We've got real, notable MLB players taking on SpongeBob and friends. Now, I'm a pretty casual baseball fan, but it blew my mind seeing Ren and Stimpy next to Miguel Cabrera, Derek Jeter, and Alex Rodriguez.
You should have shot A-Rod.
Now, when you dig a little bit behind the scenes, this crossover kind of makes a bit of sense. Firstly, sports leagues are always looking for ways to indoctrinate kids and get them to sign up for a life of misery because they chose a random team off the cuff when they were 6 or 7. And Nickelodeon has done plenty of this in recent years, most notably their partnership with the NFL and Madden. But the actual combination of real MLB players and Nicktoons stems from the fact that 2K Sports had this arcadey baseball series called The Bigs. The first game in the Bigs series released in 2007, followed up by a sequel called The Bigs 2 in 2009. With Nicktoons MLB coming out in 2011 and this series seemingly on a 2-year release cycle, my assumption is one of two things happened. One, 2K saw that The Bigs wasn't doing well enough and wanted to pivot, seeing the Nicktoons as a way to give this series a different niche or audience. Or number two, Blue Castle Games, who developed the 2 games in the Bigs series but were not an internal 2K dev team, were acquired by Capcom in September of 2010 after releasing Dead Rising 2, and promptly were turned into the Dead Rising studio, which left the Bigs series without a dev. Honestly, it might be a combination of both of those factors, ultimately leading to 2K linking up with iconic licensed game developer High Voltage Software and taking this series in a strange new direction.
I'm taking it to strange new places.
Now, as far as my research has found, Nicktoons MLB's official promotional materials never actually called out the fact that this is basically a sequel to The Bigs. The only time this was mentioned online was when games journalists put 2 and 2 together. When you look at each game side by side, it's clear that they're sharing assets, and apparently they ran on the exact same engine. This whole strange backstory and development is why when you compare the average review score of the first 2 games in the Big series to the rare Nicktoons MLB reviews that exist, the drop-off is so large. But it's not always about critic reviews.
It's about the Mets, baby. Love the Mets. All right, baby. Let's go. Get a home run, baby. Love the Mets. Let's go, Mets.
So Nicktoons MLB features all the MLB teams, plus the all-star teams from the time of this game's release, alongside obviously a cast of Nicktoons characters. Because this is an arcadey interpretation of baseball, it's not as simple as just picking a pre-made team and then hitting dingers. Instead, this game has a couple of different ways to handle teams. In quick play, you'll pick an MLB team before heading to a draft screen. Here, you and your opponent take it in turns, drafting 5 different Nicktoons characters to round out your roster, giving you a mishmash of real players and cartoon characters. The draft format is a pretty neat idea, and I think something like this would have been really fun when playing with friends. As a kid, when we'd usually play a multiplayer game like this, it was usually a mad dash to select your character the quickest, so something that brings in a little bit of strategy and planning is nice. While you're drafting, you're also specifically picking players for actual baseball positions, rather than just randomly adding them to your team. Before you jump into a match, you've also got a few settings you can tweak, including the difficulty and how many innings you want to play. And then you're away for a day at the ballpark, doing pretty much everything you'd expect from a baseball game. You can throw a bunch of different types of pitches. When batting, you've got different types of hits, including a bunt, and they even have a base stealing mechanic. I'm assuming this is where building off the platform the Bigs 2 built comes into play. There is no way all of these mechanics make their way into a Nicktoons baseball game built from the ground up, but because this is being salvaged from a pre-existing series, you do get these nice touches that actual baseball fans would appreciate. Naturally, due to the arcade nature of the game, most actions in this game are pretty uncomplicated to execute. Pitching sees you choosing a spot to throw the ball with the left stick, before selecting what type of pitch you want to throw with one of the face buttons, and then you hold that button down to time your power. Pitching is definitely the easiest of all the actions you perform in this game. There's never any challenge of getting the ball to go exactly where you want it to, and timing your pitch's release so it's perfect is way easier than it probably should be. Because this is so easy, the over-the-top arcade elements start to become a bit of a problem. There's this blue zone called the hit zone, which I'm assuming is where the batter wants the ball to be pitched ideally. However, if you throw a strike in this zone, there are major benefits for you in the form of this meter that gets built significantly faster by throwing strikes there. More on that later. The more strikes you throw in the hit zone, the smaller it shrinks, making it harder for the batter, and also harder for you to get that extra boost towards your meter, at least in theory. Disappointingly, you cannot bean players with a wayward pitch. Very sad news as somebody who personally would have loved to knock Dudley Puppy on his ass. This is actually a feature that was in the Bigs 2 apparently, but has been removed from Nicktoons MLB for pretty obvious reasons. When batting, your A button is for a contact swing, which essentially is you trying not to hit the ball in the air, while B is your power swing that can put the ball into the outfield or out of the park entirely if you time it well enough. At first, batting seemed ridiculously tough, especially compared to the pitching. I literally couldn't get on base and I could barely hit anything at all. But as soon as I grasped the timing, it became a lot better, and overall it felt like the batting was decent from a feel and mechanics standpoint. Maybe I was just positive about it because there was at least some challenge here compared to the pitching. Fielding the ball in Nicktoons MLB is pretty basic most of the time. You can control your character to run towards the ball and switch between fielders if necessary, but most of the time you probably won't have to do anything, as the ball will get hit straight to a character, which the game then auto catches. If the ball is on the ground, or God forbid the game decides you drop the catch, you press one of the face buttons to throw the ball to somebody on base. Right now, Nicktoons MLB is probably sounding like a pretty typical baseball game, and that's because it kinda is. Like Nicktoons Basketball, I don't think this game goes far enough or over the top enough with the Nicktoons nature of it all. The one major exception is the turbo meter. As I alluded to earlier, you have a meter that gets filled by performing certain actions. The easiest way is to throw strikes in general, however strikes in the hit zone give you a massive leg up. The other way to fill up the meter is to take a ball while batting. Needless to say, it's much easier to build this meter while pitching, and in fact, I don't think there's a way to get an extra boost in meter gained while batting the way you can when pitching. Once your meter has been filled up enough, you can activate it for a turbo pitch, which is almost guaranteed to be a strike, or a turbo hit, which if timed correctly is a guaranteed home run. Turbo can also be used when fielding or running, but this is easily the worst way to use it. The biggest issue with the turbo meter is that it is so easy to build it, while the AI opponents struggle. I appreciate that they can use turbo at all after playing Nicktoons Basketball, but the fact that I could build my whole turbo meter gauge before the opponent had done anything of note was a bit insane, considering 1 bar of turbo is a guaranteed home run. I think this is another aspect of Nicktoons MLB that probably works better playing against a friend. Outside of the turbo meter, there isn't much else of a wacky nature when it comes to the gameplay. There are these things that the game refers to as amazing moves, which essentially allows you to pull off crazy catches in the field. The very short tutorial text told me to press A at the right time to trigger, which I never actually figured out. Apparently this would then take you to a mini game that you need to complete in order to pull it off. I saw the AI pull this off a bunch of times though, so I guess this was slightly evening the odds after my turbo dominance. You get occasional over-the-top animation moments like this rebounding catch in like my second game ever, which really caught me off guard, or the fact that Zim absolutely plowed through this catcher at home plate in that very same game. But these kind of moments are very few and far between. Each Nicktoon has their own unique attributes, which will dictate what types of pitches they can throw, and other basic things like power and speed. I'd say speed is probably the only attribute that becomes really noticeable in the gameplay, particularly when I was using Katara. If that girl gets on base, you can bet your ass she's making it home if there's another hit in that innings. Outside of that though, the attributes didn't seem to matter too much. After playing a game and being sent back to the main menu, you'll probably find that you've unlocked several Nicktoons baseball cards. All of these are stored in a collection on the main menu, and you unlock them by meeting certain conditions in a match. If you do these things multiple times, you can level up the cards to silver and then eventually gold status. These basically act as an achievement system, which is kind of funny because this game was on Xbox 360. I played the Wii version, so it kind of makes sense on that platform, but I imagine this feature was pretty redundant on Xbox. Also, that reminds me, I didn't mention that this game is weirdly only on the 360, the Wii, and later released on the 3DS. No idea why it skipped PlayStation entirely when the Bigs and the Bigs 2 were both on PlayStation consoles. So yeah, that's the core gameplay for Nicktoons MLB. It's not terrible, but it's ultimately just a bit dull. But outside of quick play, what game modes are there for you to utilize this dull gameplay? Well, the main game mode on offer here is Tournament, which is essentially a gauntlet mode where you play a best of 3 series against 6 MLB teams in a row, eventually culminating against an all-star team. This mode also changes how the teams work. All of the teams you face are pure MLB teams. For your team, you can actually choose to play as an MLB team if you're really boring, or you can pick your own roster of Nick characters. So you choose your team, and that's kind of where the unique stuff ends. You're just playing the regular game here, trying not to get bored by the fact that you need to play at least 14 games, or worst case scenario 21 games if you somehow manage to lose a game in every single series. Now is probably a good time for me to mention that this game is a little too easy on normal difficulty, to the point that I never lost a game in my tournament mode. To be fair to the game, I felt like the difficulty was ramping up the further I went in the mode, and there absolutely were a few games where if there wasn't a well-timed use of my turbo meter, I probably would have lost. But the fact that I didn't lose any games definitely means the difficulty is a bit off. The only neat little quirk that pops up in tournament mode that's different to the regular quick play is that each game ends with a player of the game, which I appreciated. And I especially appreciated that it would give player of the game to a member of the losing team if they really deserved it. This is something that some modern AAA sports games can't even do. Once you stomp your way through the tournament and win the whole thing, you get a very brief unique cutscene for winning it all, and then it's all over with basically no fanfare. The two other modes here are Showdown and Distance Derby. Showdown is essentially just quick play, but allows for you to pick a full team of Nicktoons or an MLB team full of individually selected players. Distance Derby is basically a home run derby mode where you need to aim your shots to hit targets, which then build up a score. Once you hit the score threshold, you need to hit the screen to win the game. This one was boring and very easy. So with all of that said, it brings us to one of the most critical parts of a Nickelodeon crossover. The Nickelodeon crossover. 9 different shows are represented here with playable characters. You've got the usual suspects like SpongeBob, Avatar, and Danny Phantom, but then also some left field representation like Planet Sheen, Fanboy and Chum Chum, and Tough Puppy. As you might have guessed, This game's roster is big on promoting the currently airing slate of shows on Nickelodeon, which, now that I think about it more, I kind of love it specifically for this game, because going forward, Nickelodeon is almost exclusively focused on nostalgia and its most popular IPs. On Nicktoons MLB's roster, we've got SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy, Larry, Flying Dutchman, Danny, Dudley Puppy, Kitty Catwell, Sheen, Mr. Nesmith, Ultralord, Fanboy, Chum Chum, Aang, Katara, Toph, Zuko, Zim, Gaz, Ren, Stimpy, Powdered Toast Man, and the Shaven Yak. There are also 2 exclusive characters on the 3DS, Jimmy Neutron and Hero Mighty Paw, a character from the long-forgotten Monkey Quest MMO. For me, I think the most surprising thing on this game's roster is that Ren and Stimpy is the show tied for the second most characters alongside Avatar. Who was the massive Ren and Stimpy fan on this game's dev team? Honestly, this roster is kind of cool, even if it isn't a huge celebration of Nick's overall history. Like, obviously we're gonna get a bunch of SpongeBob reps, but instead of Mr. Krabs, Plankton, or Squidward, we got Larry and Flying Dutchman. Super random, but also cool as heck. There's just so many random appearances here, including Tough Puppy, Fanboy and Chum Chum, and Planet Sheen getting pretty much their only video game representation ever. It actually makes me like Nicktoons MLB's roster. But then I remembered that there isn't a single damn Hey Arnold rep here. Hey Arnold was like the baseball Nicktoon. How did we not get any characters from that show? Interestingly, in the game's files you can see that Rocco was planned to be playable at some point, which would have upped the old school representation, while Squidward also appears in the files of the 3DS version. Probably the biggest bummer here is that there aren't any unlockable characters, or anything unlockable at all other than the baseball cards, which majorly impacts your motivation to explore everything this game has to offer. Every character here is voiced and everybody has their usual voice actor, except Danny for some reason. Continuing that weird tradition where like one character has a different voice in every game where the Nicktoons aren't mute. Also, is it just me or does SpongeBob say I'm a dirty boy?
I'm a dirty boy.
I'm a dirty boy.
The crossover elements also extend to the ballparks you can play at. These are mostly just visual changes, at least when you play at the Nicktoons ballparks. The real MLB ballparks have their quirky, unique elements, like that cheating-ass green wall at Fenway. They do have some unique animations that play out if you hit a home run in these Nicktoons ballparks. The SpongeBob ballpark in particular is the best of all of these. In total, you get 6 Nicktoons ballparks, or 7 if you're on 3DS and you get that sweet exclusive Monkey Quest ballpark. These are the Poseidome, Frosty Freeze Field, Yolkus Stadium, Air Temple Courtyard, Erkin Field, and Ghost Zone Stadium. Kinda lame that Tough Puppy and Ren and Stimpy didn't get their own ballparks though. You're probably wondering why the 3DS version got so many exclusives, and that's probably because this version launched about 6 months after the home console versions. It's kind of like a reverse Punch Time Explosion scenario. There's also cameo appearances of characters from Rugrats, Rocko's Modern Life, Are Real Monsters, Hey Arnold, The Angry Beavers, Cat Dog, El Tigre, Back at the Barnyard, and The Mighty Bee in the game's loading screens. Last thing I wanted to talk about was the game's presentation. Visually, I think it looks fine. It gets the job done for an arcadey sports game, and it somehow doesn't make it too jarring that real MLB players are pitching to cartoon characters. I also found that almost all of the Nicktoons characters translated to 3D pretty well here, except Powdered Toast Man, who is absolutely horrifying. Probably my least favorite aspect of the presentation was the commentary. Yes, there are commentators here. They actually have Perch Perkins and Gerd doing commentary. The idea was cool, but having Gerd do this is so goddamn grating. Hearing him scream in your ears is painful. And no, I'm not joking or exaggerating. Much of his commentary is just literal screaming. Nicktoons MLB is okay, but but it's not wacky enough for a Nicktoons game. There are a few notable flaws in the gameplay, and overall, there's just not much to do here. There's actually no point to the tournament mode, or any mode for that matter, because there isn't anything to unlock, and there isn't a season mode or something like that. But despite saying all of that, I enjoyed the very random nature of this crossover, in more ways than one. I love the fact that this is basically the Bigs 3. I love that this is a crossover with actual MLB players, and I just love how weird the Nicktoons character roster is here. Unfortunately, the gameplay does hold it back, so it only gets as high as C tier. After Nicktoons MLB came and went, us deranged Nickelodeon video game fans had to wait a whole 7 years for a new Nickelodeon crossover game to release on PC and consoles. With so much time to cook something up, surely Nickelodeon's big return to crossovers would be an S tier game, right? Right? Wrong. Nickelodeon said you'll get Nickelodeon slop races and you'll enjoy it. Bizarrely, the original Nickelodeon kart races was a game that somehow passed me by at the time. However, I did play Grand Prix and Slime Speedway at release, so it's going to be a bit weird to jump back to the beginning and see where this series started. Jumping into Nick Kart Races 1, everything somehow feels both familiar and also foreign. As is standard with the series, you can customize your kart before you race, choosing from different tyres and engines that actually affect your kart's performance, as well as cosmetic choices like the paint job. Once you start racing is where things felt the most foreign to me. Probably didn't help that roughly 30 seconds into the game I started glitching through the track. A kart racer is obviously going to live and die by how it controls and feels to play, and unfortunately Nickelodeon Kart Races is so poor in these aspects. So poor that I can easily say this is the worst controlling 3D kart racer Nickelodeon has ever produced. Racing feels so lifeless here. There's very little sense of speed, drifting feels terrible, both in the way it handles and the underwhelming boost it gives you, and overall there's a distinct lack of polish with the way the racing handles here. It feels like Nickelodeon Kart Races misses the mark on basically all of the kart racing fundamentals that had been well established up until this point. They even miss on something as simple as the camera, which feels way too zoomed in here. It genuinely threw me off at first. A key aspect of the racing is the slime bar. This would go on to become a staple of the series, but the two sequels use it in a far more interesting way. Here you'll drive over sections of the track covered in slime, that will then fill the meter, and once filled enough, you can unleash a speed boost. It's a pretty basic system that isn't even immune from rough execution, because they use the Y button on Xbox or triangle on PlayStation to activate this. You kinda get used to this over time, but it definitely doesn't feel like the ideal spot for it. As you'd expect, there's a bunch of chaotic item pickups littered around the track for you to take out other racers, apply a speed boost, or even defend yourself from an oncoming attack. Like many kart races trying to take a sliver of the Mario Kart glory, these are pretty derivative, and none of the power-ups stood out as particularly unique. Probably the biggest sin with the power-ups is that the game regularly gives you OP items when you're already at the front of the pack. There were multiple times I was given the game's equivalent of the Bullet Bill item while I was in a podium position, which is just absurd, and I would have been infuriated if I was on the receiving end of that. One of the genuinely unique things to this game is also one of its least explained. Apparently each kart racer has their own unique power-up. I only discovered this because I chose to read through the game's entire tutorial section. However, they don't ever truly explain how this works. I played as Arnold throughout the game, and his special ability were these pigeons that essentially act as another Bullet Bill type power-up, except you don't really smash other racers out of the way. Instead, this power-up has a tendency to spaz out, or at best it'll just wear off in time for you to fling straight into a wall. The part that's not explained about this system is how you end up with these unique power-ups. To me, it seemed like the game randomly gifted them to you. It almost always happened at the start of your last lap, but there were also other random times that the game would give me it. Is this just a power-up that you can always land on when grabbing an item box, as long as the RNG is in your favor? No idea, because the game doesn't explain it to you. Which is funny, because this game is constantly explaining everything to you. These tutorial screens pop up constantly, and they're a major annoyance. To try and breathe some life into the game, the devs opted for tracks that tend to change ever so slightly between laps. It's rare that you'll find a track that does the exact same thing on back-to-back laps, instead opening up new turns to throw a wrench in the race. I get the thought process behind it and kinda enjoyed how this keeps you on your toes, but I also found it took some of the skill out of the races. Instead of knowing what the track was going to throw at you and then being able to race it incredibly well, it felt like I was always having to adapt to some new change. It's not necessarily a bad thing that they opted for these constantly evolving tracks, and I honestly might just be down on this feature because overall the tracks are just kinda bad. It's hard to explain without you experiencing it yourself, but the overall layout of tracks feels quite poor. It doesn't have the flow of a Mario Kart or even Nick Kart Races 2 or 3. And making matters worse, a lot of the tracks are very samey. There are technically 4 tracks per show represented here, but in reality it feels like a lot less than that. There's basically 2 settings for each show that they repeat multiple times for tracks, and it all just blurs together. I couldn't tell you which Rugrats Toy Store track was which. At the end of the day, not a single one of these tracks stood out to me. I couldn't name you a favourite track or a least favourite track because they left that little of an impression on me. As you're going through races, you'll also have the side quest of collecting these slime tokens. These are added to an overall running tally which allows you to buy new kart parts from the store. It's a decent feature and one that I'm glad to see stick around for the sequels, where it was used in a much more interesting fashion. After completing each race, you'll also notice an XP meter increasing, and seemingly some sort of level system. No idea what caused this to increase more or less, but once you do level up, you're taken to what the game calls a victory lap. This is the opportunity to run over 3 boxes, which are then opened and will give you either a handy sum of slime tokens or just straight up gift you kart parts from the store. The last aspect of the gameplay that we've got to talk about is the jet ski sections. Ever since Mario Kart did it, every goddamn kart racer has got to add in some sort of tweak to the racing, whether that's flying, which this game also has, or transforming and hitting the water. Now, the idea here was kinda solid because all of the jet ski sections happen on giant rivers of slime. Makes sense for Nickelodeon, but the execution is terrible. For some reason, they take away the ability to drift in these sections, which makes the racing so dull. You're also constantly filling your slime meter in these sections, so it basically just becomes an exercise in mashing the boost button. It also really doesn't help that almost every track has one of these slime sections. It feels so forced, and it's kinda crazy that it feels rare to have a track where you just race normally for the whole thing. But without a doubt, the worst part is the dedicated jet ski tracks. An entire 3-lap race with no drifting is unbelievably boring, and the track design is next level terrible. There are all these giant wide open spaces, and honestly, while some of the aesthetic aspects do change, every jet ski track feels damn near identical. Oh, and I probably should touch on the game randomly having a team race mode. Here everybody is placed in duos, but the game never really points out or emphasizes who your duo is. Then you proceed to just basically race a normal race. Apparently there's a team up hammer attack you can use, but both races have to be near each other to pull it off. At the end of the race, everybody is ranked by a combined time between the duos. It's a really poorly thought out idea. At best, it maybe could have been fun with a friend. Outside of just doing free races, you've got a whole 2 modes to choose from here. You've got time trial, which, side note here, has anybody played a time trial mode since like 1999? And then you've got your standard Grand Prix mode. Bizarrely, there's also the option to play Grand Prix with team race rules, if you're somebody who hates themselves, I guess. You've got 3 difficulty levels for the cups, and thankfully you don't have to slog through each difficulty and can go straight to the highest if you're a pro kart racer like me. 6 different cups are unlocked from the start, each consisting of 4 races. What I found really cool was that some of the races in the cups are not just your standard 3-lap races. Instead, you'll occasionally get races in the style of Cartoon Network Racing's Cartoon Eliminator mode, where the person in last place progressively gets eliminated until you're left to like 3 races left. There's also the slalom races where you have to go around these poles. If you miss too many poles, you're eliminated. The game is very lenient with how many poles you can miss though, to the point where you can actually strategically miss them to gain an advantage. I have to give the devs a bunch of credit here. This is a really cool way to freshen things up in Grand Prix. Even in my favourite Mario Kart installments, I can only play Grand Prix in short bursts, because at the end of the day, it's ultimately the exact same thing over and over again. The change in race styles is a very clever idea, but where it really falls down is that these race variations only take place on the jet ski courses, which just ruins the idea completely. Playing through Grand Prix mode is where I really felt the weight of this game's rubber banding. Races are so damn unforgiving. You'll hit the most minor speed bump, and all of a sudden you find yourself going from 1st to 7th. I felt like everything was so much more luck-based than other races I've played. The goal of Grand Prix mode, of course, is to come in first place across the 6 initial cups in order to unlock 3 more. At least I think you're supposed to come first, because I definitely came second in this cup, but it weirdly marked it down as me winning, so who knows. Once you 3-star all of these cups, whether legitimately or in dubious fashion, you'll unlock the Orange Cup, the Slime Cup, and the Remix Cup. Each of these has 8 races instead of 4, and none of the tracks here are actually new. The Orange Cup is the most confusing of them all. As far as I could tell, it was literally just replaying 8 tracks that had absolutely nothing new to them. Slime Cup is the worst, as it's nothing but jet ski tracks, while Remix Cup is 8 tracks played in reverse. Once you trudge through all these cups and take out first place, you get the grand prize of nothing. Yep, there's literally nothing here. Which takes me to the crossover portion of Nickelodeon kart races. Like almost everything else about this game, the crossover of Nick shows is pathetic. There are 12 characters representing just 4 shows. Nicktoons Racing released 18 years earlier, and it was somehow way ahead of this game. Characters you can choose from include Angelica, Arnold, Donatello, Helga, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Patrick, Raphael, Reptar, Sandy, SpongeBob, and Tommy. As you may have picked up on, this is actually TMNT's debut in a Nickelodeon crossover game, despite being acquired by Viacom well before Nicktoons MLB hit shelves. The developers stated they were intending to release DLC after launch, including fleshing out the game's roster, but obviously this never happened. I can only assume priorities immediately shifted to developing the sequel, which released 2 years later with a roster over double in size. Strangely, the game's roster of tracks isn't terrible. Not including the backwards versions, there are 16 tracks, which is pretty good, but I guess when they decided to make multiple tracks based on the same locations, it's not too hard to pump out more. In reality, it really feels like there's 8 tracks. Would it also surprise you to hear the game's presentation is a mess? You can immediately tell this was a low-budget shovelware game when you boot it up, and you get greeted by a static, low-effort menu. Then when you jump into the gameplay, it's even rougher. Character models look very average for a game released in 2018, and there's no voice acting here whatsoever, which doesn't usually bother me too much for a kart race, but I know it's super important to a lot of you guys. The one saving grace is the music. I actually kind of liked a lot of the tracks here, and it did make slogging through Grand Prix a little more bearable. I'm trying not to spoil my upcoming thoughts on the sequels, but it is wild to see how this series started out. There are very few redeeming qualities in Nickelodeon kart races, and I'm blown away with how light on content this game is. There's genuinely 3 hours of content here at most. The awful mechanics, awful presentation, and bare bones roster all come together to create the second undisputed F-tier game in Nicktoons crossover history. There is absolutely no reason for you to ever play this game. There are literally 3 other 3D Nick kart races that are a million times better.
The biggest and most common critique about the original Nickelodeon kart races was its startling lack of content. It was slammed for this, and when you take a close look, it's easy to see why. It featured just 12 characters to choose from, covering a pathetic 4 franchises. That's worse than what we saw with Cartoon Network Speedway. Heck, it was worse than what Nicktoons Racing did back in 2000. This is something Bamtang has aimed to address right off the bat. Grand Prix boasts 30 playable characters as well as 70 crew members, with 12 different Nicktoons featured on the roster. It's also got JoJo Flippin' Siwa here. I know who I'm choosing as my main. Unfortunately, our girl JoJo can't be chosen right away. As you usually see in a game like this, much of the roster is locked at the very start.
You start the game with 16 characters to choose from, but winning in the game's various modes, you will slowly fill out the entire roster. While winning is good enough to unlock new characters and crew members, you'll be collecting coins during races to purchase the other unlockables. Like all of the recent Mario Kart entries, your race vehicles are highly customizable. Before every race, you'll pick your kart, engine, exhaust, and wheels, all of which have differing stats. You'll also be able to choose from a bunch of unique paint jobs, however these have no actual effect other than looking pretty cool. To complement the hefty roster is an equally large set of tracks to zip around. By my count, there are 28 tracks to race on. Not quite on the level of the recent high-profile kart races to release, but still plenty of content for Nick fans. These tracks show off plenty of iconic Nicktoons locations, and because the shows included here are so diverse, you never get the feeling that heaps of tracks are similar. There's even a track based on Space Madness from Ren and Stimpy. Because there are so many characters to unlock and parts to buy, you have a constant stream of new stuff unlocking. It's great motivation to keep players engaged and playing. Every time I got a new character, I was always eager to take them for a test drive. So Bamtang gets a massive tick in regards to content. It's clear that they took one of the major criticisms of the first game to heart and have come back with a stellar response. However, it's all well and good to have heaps of characters and tracks, but all of that goes to waste if the game ends up controlling like Ben 10 Galactic Racing.
Beach history's greatest monster!
Once you start the game, you're immediately thrust into a tutorial. While pretty much every kart racer of the past 20 years just plays identically to Mario Kart, it is nice to have this right off the bat so you can adjust to Grand Prix's various quirks. You'll quickly find out which buttons will throw items, drift, and perform tricks off of jumps. It'll also introduce you to one of the major differences between it and Mario Kart. And in my opinion, this is the mechanic that really makes Nick Kart Races 2 interesting. Just a moment ago, I referred to crew members as being something you unlock. What are these exactly? Well, essentially they function the same as how the gameplay in Mario Kart Double Dash worked. You pick your normal kart racer, but you then pick a team of support characters who give you exclusive benefits throughout the race. For every race, you'll pick one crew chief. Every time you pass through the many areas filled with slime in a track, a meter in the top right will fill. Once fully filled, you can unleash a special ability. This could be a speed boost, a super powerful attack, or really any number of creative additions. There are quite a lot of crew chiefs, and it never feels like they're repeating ideas. They really went outside the box for this. Alongside your crew chief, you'll pick a crew engineer and a crew mechanic. Instead of charging these characters up, they instead provide constant access to their abilities. There is a slight cooldown after use, but essentially it's available all race long. Obviously, because of how often you'll be using them, the engineer and mechanic abilities are far less OP, but still just as creative and varied. So in summary, before every race you need to choose a racer, a kart, a crew chief, your engineer and mechanic, and then several different kart parts. That might sound like a whole lot to get through, but trust me, it makes the game so much better than it otherwise would be. This intense customization is where this game shines. It creates a perfect layer of strategy and planning, both before and during the race. Not only are you trying to juggle your various stats and find a combination that suits your playstyle, but you're picking an ability that will complement it too. Once in the race, you'll then need to pick and choose when to use it. Using it prematurely could come back to bite you, while saving it for the perfect moment could be the difference between winning a race and losing a race. In my opinion, having a solid gimmick like this is what every non-Mario Kart racer needs. Let's be honest, unless you're Crash Team Racing, you're not going to even come close to touching Mario Kart in the driving mechanics. It's just not going to happen. But by adding in these unique twists on the formula and layers of strategy, you give the game a compelling hook. Now, Bamtang clearly didn't invent this crew member idea. However, I believe they take it to a more complex degree than ever before. I just really loved playing around with the combos you could create. Usually in a kart racer, I would stick to one character for the entire duration, but here I found myself switching around at every opportunity. And combining characters from wildly different franchises into one team is making my inner child go wild. Where else could you see Jojo Siwa team up with the Ninja Turtles and CatDog? Understandably, all this customization and decision making required before you go into a single race could be a little intimidating and overwhelming. Thankfully, this is still a party kart racer and not a sim racing experience. Even if you just close your eyes and blindly select things, you can still succeed thanks to the wild nature of the races in this genre. But Bamtang also includes a really helpful feature. You can get the game to suggest a specific combination for you based on who you choose as your racer and what parts you have available. These suggestions come in one of 5 archetypes, specializing in things like handling or drifting. It's so easy to follow and streamlines the process for those that don't want to get all nerdy. It's the perfect quality of life inclusion for kids too. Thankfully, the actual driving feels mostly solid. It's miles off Mario Kart 8 or Crash Team Racing Nitro fueled, but I'll be damned if it doesn't work well enough. I'm sure many of those in the press will slag it off because it isn't as perfect as what Nintendo can do, but expecting that is just ridiculous and foolish. It's mostly the little things that sees Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2 fall back to the middle of the pack when it comes to kart racing controls. The thing I immediately felt was the drifting. It just feels a whole lot worse than the best in the genre. It also doesn't help that the drifting mechanics of Mario Kart are basically burned into my memory. I had to consciously remind myself to take corners differently. Once I managed to force my brain to stop thinking I was playing Mario Kart, I was able to get a better grip on the drifting. It's still not amazing, but again, it's serviceable enough. I also found that you lose far too much momentum and speed when bumping into other racers. Sure, you should slow down if a massive character like Heifer barrels into you, but slightly touching Lincoln Loud shouldn't send you back to the speed of Crawl. This causes big issues at the start of pretty much every race. Everybody gets the big starting line boost, but because the entire field of racers are packed in tight, you all end up hitting each other and slowing right down. In the end, it really hurts the game's overall sense of speed. There's not nearly enough warning that you're about to drive off the track either. No, I don't mean when you drive into a bottomless pit. I mean when you end up on the grass or in the gravel. In the majority of tracks, these areas basically just blend into the proper race parts of the track. You'll take a seemingly normal corner and then start slowing down, eventually realizing that you're not supposed to be on that innocuous piece of flooring. When it comes to game modes, the wheel hasn't exactly been reinvented for Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2. You have the Slime Grand Prix, challenges, time trials, and arena mode to entertain you. Let's start with the Slime Grand Prix, which is the centerpiece of the game. Just like Mario Kart, you'll select a Grand Prix, race through 4 different tracks, and then get ranking points based on where you finish in the hope of sitting atop the leaderboard when it's all said and done. It's a tried and tested formula. There are 8 Grand Prix to work your way through, and just like Mario Kart, there are different difficulties. You can tackle them on slow, medium, or fast settings, which alter the speed of the karts and the AI's competency. I was initially extremely worried about this. I started my first Grand Prix on medium, and it was awful. I absolutely blew by everyone and wasn't challenged for a single moment. I don't even want to think about how much of a pushover the slowest setting is. Thankfully, the fast setting gets it spot on. It will vary based on your own personal skills, but I found that it was the perfect level of challenge. I was being tested in every race, and while I wasn't losing Grand Prix, I was losing at least one race in almost every one that I competed in. In particular, I was getting absolutely destroyed in Jojo Siwa's level. Any kart racing veteran will likely beat the entire Grand Prix mode without suffering too many losses, but I don't think they'll be bored by it. There's enough of a challenge to keep you on your toes. Once you've had your fill of standard racing, it's time to move to the challenges. Here you'll be racing under weird sets of rules. Sometimes you'll have to break targets with projectiles, other times you'll have to maneuver from last to first in a short time frame. Again, it's nothing you haven't seen in other races before, but I found it to be a fun supplementary mode. It also serves as a way to unlock several characters too. After beating a set number of challenges on a particular list, you gain access to a boss race. This is a 1v1 race similar to what's found in Crash Team Racing. It feels like Bamtang really went and studied other kart races in preparation for this. Most of the ideas here are unoriginal, but why reinvent the wheel when you don't have to? Time trial mode is exactly what it sounds like. In here you'll be testing your pure racing abilities against ghost times. Lastly, we have arena mode. Yet again borrowing from others in the genre, this is essentially the classic battle mode from Mario Kart. There are 2 types of games that can be played here. The first is a free-for-all deathmatch sort of setup, where you're trying to score as many hits on your opponents in the allocated time. The second game is kind of like Capture the Flag, where you need to retrieve a randomly placed spatula and hold on to it to score points. I appreciate the inclusion of this, but it's pretty meh. I've never really been a huge fan of these battle modes, so a discount version was never going to knock my socks off. I think the best part of this mode is that the 2 special arenas used for it are based on the Kids' Choice Awards and Double Dare. That right there is really a summary of what I like most about this game. Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2 feels like a celebration of Nickelodeon. It's not perfect, and really could have stood to include characters from their iconic live-action shows, but for the most part this game celebrates Nick's rich history. The last thing to mention in terms of gameplay is that you can race online. I believe the original didn't even have this, so you can finally test your skills against other Nickelodeon fans around the world. Presentation-wise, the game does well enough. The visuals were never going to be on the level of its high-profile counterparts, but most of the characters have been translated well into this unified 3D style, and the environments are fun to race through. The music's decent too, and I found the menus really easy to navigate, which is important considering how much customization and unlocking is going on here. It's just a solid made game from top to bottom.
Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2 is such an insane step up from the first Nick Kart Racers game. It honestly feels like that original game was a beta test or a tech demo or something, and this was the real first release in the series. They've revamped the racing to make it feel so much better, and the amount of care and effort put into the actual crossover and paying homage to Nick's history is way off the charts. They might have actually gone from the worst to the best in the space of a single game when it comes to this aspect. I don't think it quite nails everything enough to get into S tier, but it well and truly earns its place as the first ever A tier Nickelodeon crossover game.
Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl is such a frustrating game. It's certainly not a bad game, but I think what makes it so frustrating is a lot of the design decisions and overall focus of the game. If you're somehow following my channel but don't know what Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl is, it's essentially Super Smash Bros. But for Nickelodeon. For a while, Nick has been pumping out entries in the Super Brawl franchise on their website and for mobile, but for the first time ever they've brought the crossover fighting fun to consoles and PC. The origins of this dream game seem to be a result of a little game called Slap City. This game was developed by Ludosity and is a platform fighter like Super Smash Bros. Apparently, people at Nickelodeon saw this and approached the developer with the idea for All-Star Brawl. That's an extremely promising sign right off the bat for the game. Not only did the developer have experience in making a Smash Bros style game, but it was well received too. I think the biggest relief for me upon booting up the game and playing a few matches was immediately realizing that the gameplay was good. A fighting game lives and dies by this. If the gameplay sucks, it doesn't matter how amazing everything else is. The fighting is so incredibly polished in All-Star Brawl. While other Smash clones have put their own spin on the formula or have had a hard time replicating it, Ludosity has essentially lifted the Smash Bros mechanics and plopped it down here. This is unashamedly a Smash clone, but that's not a problem when the gameplay is spot on. Anybody familiar with the genre will be right at home here from the very first fight. The different types of attacks, grabs, recovery moves, it's all pretty much identical. I think one thing Ludosity really should be commended for is how they've made pretty much every character a joy to play. It was incredibly rare that I spent time with a character and felt like I never wanted to use them again. I think the key to this is that characters always have at least one unique gimmick that makes them a blast to play with, even if they don't completely mesh with your style or you haven't grasped how to effectively use them. For example, Zim is low on my list of favourite characters to use here, however, causing havoc with his Gur attack was a blast. Having a roster that has been so well designed gives a party game like this such longevity. I remember how many hours I sunk into Smash Bros Brawl as a teen, purely because it was fun to just click random on the character select screen and have to deal with a brand new character. Whether I'm roping in opponents with Sandy's lasso or unleashing an all-out assault with Leonardo's swords, there's enjoyment on every end of the spectrum with this game's roster. While all of that makes this game seem like it would be a party favourite, there are other aspects of the gameplay that contradict this in a big way. One glaring omission from the Smash formula is items. Smash purists and competitive players turn these off, but for the majority of players, these are part of what makes the game so fun. The chaos of the items allows a group of friends with wildly different skill levels to have a more even playing field, but here it's just a straight man-to-man fight almost all of the time. This is honestly baffling to me. It's like if Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2 decided to be a pure racing game instead of including a plethora of items to throw at other races. It gets even stranger when you consider that some stages have hazards or crazy gimmicks in them that you would typically expect to see in a Smash Bros game. Removing the items seems like a deliberate decision to make the game more competitive focused, but when you see stages that have such blatant and gimmicky hazards, I'm left dreaming about a version of the game that fully embraces the party side of things. So you get it, the gameplay is pretty much just Smash Bros. Smash Bros Melee to be exact. Clearly the devs were big fans of the frenetic pacing of the GameCube installment, which is why you see stuff like wave dashing here. But Smash Bros games since Melee have focused on a lot more than just fighting against your friends, with plenty of unique single player content on offer. Sure, the OG Nintendo 64 game was pretty bare bones, but Melee had Adventure Mode, Brawl had Subspace Emissary, and Ultimate had World of Light. Outside of these mega single player modes, there are plenty of other fun single player options. In All-Star Brawl, single player fun is slim pickings. Obviously there's the battle option, which is where you'll set up single player fights against friends or the AI, being able to customize just about everything when it comes to rules. You've got team fights, a training mode, and something called Sports Ball. This is a unique game mode that is focused on teams scoring goals rather than killing opponents. The more times the ball is struck without hitting the ground before going into the goal, the greater your score will be. This is all pretty neat, but not something you'll be spending much time with if you're playing on your own. Naturally, you can jump online, taking pretty much all of those offline modes to the internet to take on random kids from around the world that will no doubt school your ass. The main feature of All-Star Brawl's single player experience is arcade mode. If you're familiar with platform fighters or just fighters in general, you'll know exactly what this is. Here you'll pick a fighter, a difficulty option, and then smash your way through 7 stages, with the goal being to basically see how fast you can clear it. This is a staple of fighting games and was a perfectly fine centerpiece for single player, back in 1999. It's so laughably basic. The only kind of interesting thing present in the mode is that a few times throughout you get to pick between 2 characters to face on the next stage. Outside of that, it's just a bit boring. There's not even the added bonus of having a boss battle at the end the way Smash or PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale did. At the end of the day, I was left wondering why anybody would even bother with this mode other than trying to grind out the game's Platinum Trophy. You want a cool crossover story? Too bad. You'll get a boring 2-sentence text exchange before each match and you'll be happy about it. This dialogue isn't even the characters talking to one another. It's just one of like 3 lines each character has. I played through the entire arcade mode with every character and it only took a handful of runs for this to start getting tiresome. Levels and characters quickly become repetitive and the absence of items and the fact every fight is 1v1 wore thin. The stages being repetitive was particularly weird. I swear the arcade mode is glitched, because some stages I would see basically every playthrough, while there were numerous stages I rarely ever saw. All of this ultimately culminates in a supremely disappointing single player experience. One of the things I love most about Smash is that it has something for players who don't have a bunch of local friends to play with and aren't able to compete strongly online. I fall into this category, yet still buy Smash every single time because I know there's going to be a robust single player suite. I have literally never played Smash Ultimate online or with friends, yet I've still had an unbelievably enjoyable time with it. If you're on the fence about purchasing All-Star Brawl, I'd highly recommend asking yourself why you'd be buying the game. Are you keen to jump online and try to compete with the best of the best? If so, buy this game, the gameplay is top notch. Do you have a group of local friends to brawl with? If so, I'd recommend the game too, even if it's lacking some of the best party elements. But if you're not planning to capitalize on those 2 things and you're looking for a single player gameplay suite, well, there's not much here for you. It's in areas like this where I genuinely believe Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2 is a more well-rounded game. Not only did that game have a robust online and multiplayer section, but there were also plenty of things to experience solo. Heck, there's not even anything for players to unlock here. Every character and stage is available from the beginning and there are no hidden secrets for you to discover. Your only reward for doing anything in single player is a bunch of art and character models in the game's gallery when you beat arcade mode. The strangest thing is that all of these omissions when it comes to single player and the party elements of the game appear to be deliberate. For better or for worse, Ludosity have designed this game with competitive play as their priority. Prior to releasing the game, one of the devs was quoted as saying, "The game was designed with competitive play in mind from its inception, with Ludosity seeking to simplify the controls for newer players without sacrificing the gameplay depth sought by competitive players." I think they 100% achieved that goal. The game is pretty easy to pick up, especially so if you have ever played Smash before, but will be tough to master. What the real problem is that Ludosity focused way too much on competitive play. A perfect example of this is that there isn't a proper tutorial in the game that teaches you its many mechanics. There's a how to play section that is literally just a 29 slide PowerPoint presentation. It's clear to me that Ludosity decided they were making a game to cater to the hardest of hardcore Smash players, So why would you include a proper tutorial? These players don't need one. The removal of items? A no-brainer. The intellectual Smash purist wouldn't be caught dead playing with items on. A single player story? What's the point? You don't make it to Evo by playing through World of Light like a peasant. Having to unlock characters? Why would you do that? I need to use my main right away. Ludosity caters to the smallest minority of Smash players, and the game is so much worse for it. While I mentioned that some stages feature hazards, they are few and far between. Most of the levels are just a basic flat plane with maybe a platform or two if you're lucky. By my count, literally half of the stages in this game are some variation of Final Destination or Battlefield, which makes for a boring fighting experience. Making sure your stages are esports ready isn't the worst thing in the world, but when the game only has 20 stages, making half of them boring is a huge problem. It's an especially baffling decision when Smash Bros already solved this problem anyway. Smash 4 and Ultimate have Omega stages. These are variants of the regular stages which make them a flat plane and tournament ready, without sacrificing the overall gameplay experience. It's strange that Ludosity would take so much inspiration from Smash and be so competitive focused, yet ignore this game-changing option that made Smash the most competitive friendly it's ever been. But now I've come to the biggest elephant in the room. All-Star Brawl fares great in the gameplay and poorly in gameplay options. How does it handle the crossover nature of it all? In my personal opinion, it's substandard. Not horrible like Nickelodeon Kart Racers 1 is, but still far from ideal. Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl's base game roster features 20 characters from 13 shows. At a glance, this is 6 less characters than Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion XL, a game that is over 10 years old. All-Star Brawl does cover more shows here though, so I'll give them credit for that. The roster just feels so light. It only has one more character than PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale did at launch, and that game was panned for having a bare bones roster. However, I did say every character on the roster feels great to use. No doubt focusing on just 20 characters allowed them to tweak it to perfection. The bigger issue I have is that they make some baffling choices for the roster. First of all, 45% of the roster is taken up by characters from just 3 franchises. TMNT, SpongeBob and Avatar all get 3 reps, taking a sizable chunk out of the roster. Rugrats is represented, but by Reptar, not by any of the babies who are infinitely more iconic. I initially assumed this was probably a mandate from Nick. Would make sense they don't want babies being beat up in a game, but it was pointed out to me that they have appeared in other Nick Brawl games, so that's not likely to be the case. Similarly, Hey Arnold is represented but by Helga, not, Arnold. Then you've got iconic shows such as Rocko's Modern Life, Fairly Odd Parents and Jimmy Neutron that are absent entirely. I think All-Star Brawl massively fails as a celebration of Nickelodeon. They kept the roster small but clogged it up with overrepresenting a few shows and bizarre character choices from others. Naturally, because the roster couldn't even fit a bunch of iconic shows and characters, there was no hope for cult favourites like Angry Beavers or Rocket Power appearing. These less popular characters are what make crossover games so damn fun. I love playing Smash because there are pop culture icons like Mario and Pikachu fighting alongside Ice Climbers, Mr. Game & Watch and Pip. At the end of the day, it's the celebration of all things Nintendo that makes Smash beloved. Everything else is secondary. Just including the most popular franchises makes this less of a celebration of Nickelodeon as a whole, and more just a circle jerk of the iconic shows, many of which still get their own video games. Having 3 reps from SpongeBob and TMNT each is lame when we are constantly getting new dedicated games for those franchises. I would have gladly removed one of the Turtles, Sandy and Toph in favour of 3 reps from the shows that entirely missed out. Apparently 2 DLC fighters are coming within the first month or so, which basically shows they were intended for the base game but couldn't be completed in time. I would be very surprised if they weren't Timmy and Jimmy, but considering some of the game's roster choices, who knows. The developers have stated they have plans for DLC in the future, but I'm not confident we'll ever get that. This game will need to sell well for Nickelodeon and the game's publisher to keep dumping money into it, and I'm not sure it'll be popular enough to do so, especially considering it's releasing at the busiest time of year for video games. Even then, the game needs like half a dozen DLC characters just to cover all of the obvious omissions, so basically none of the cult favourites have any chance of appearing in this game. The same criticism can be lobbed at the stages. There are 20 of these, 6 less than in Punch Time Explosion XL. Hell, the 3DS version of that game had 21. You can't even claim they focused on quality over quantity with the stages either, because half of them are almost a cut and paste job. And obviously the final nail in the coffin, which has already been mentioned, there's no cool crossover story to be found here. The overall presentation of All-Star Brawl is heavily inspired by Smash, almost to an even greater degree than the gameplay. It almost goes too far with it. It's not so much inspiration as it is copyright infringement. There are legitimately dozens of design elements that feel like they were lifted directly from Smash. It almost makes the game not have its own identity. Stuff like menu design isn't a crucial part of the experience, so why lift it directly from the game you're inspired by? It's just unnecessary. Come up with something unique and fresh. What I do love is that the game is filled with plenty of references when it comes to the moves, animations, and taunts. This is what I wanted from the game. Most movesets, especially for the characters that aren't natural fighters, are filled to the brim with callbacks to iconic moments from their respective shows. You've got plenty of memes referenced with the SpongeBob characters and stuff like CatDog busting out the golden hydrant. It's great to see. Victory screens are full of this stuff too, and then you've got the taunts. Practically all of these are great references. This is the one area where Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl feels like a celebration of Nickelodeon. But it ends there. It's not something that bothers me personally, but characters aren't voiced here. Having reviewed Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2 though, I'm fully aware of the vocal fan base that want this. Even as somebody who isn't fazed by having no voices, I must admit it was rather odd here. I think it's because the game doesn't have any items to add extra sound effects and chaos. In Nick Kart Racers, you have the soundtrack and the items and general race chaos which distracts from not having voice acting. In All-Star Brawl, you basically just have the background music playing. Characters don't make any sound whatsoever, and it creates a little bit of an awkward vibe. The soundtrack is actually superb, but it can't really make up for this absence. If voice acting is a deal breaker for you, you'll hate this game. The final thing I wanted to mention was alternate costumes. They don't exist here. This seems like an easy way to make more references and further strengthen the celebration of Nickelodeon, but they're bizarrely absent. Even from a pure gameplay perspective, it's strange. Any fight featuring more than one of the same character gets confusing quickly. I'm caught in two minds about Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl. On one hand, it plays superbly. This has definitely overtaken PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale as my favourite non-Smash platform fighter. This is the most accurate recreation of Smash Bros gameplay I've ever seen. At times you would genuinely think they have slapped a Nickelodeon skin on Smash Ultimate. When it comes to pure gameplay and fighting mechanics, All-Star Brawl can't be faulted. But outside of that, I think the game fails in pretty much every area. The party game vibe, non-existent. The complete removal of items and intense competitive focus has removed many of the over-the-top elements you'd see in Smash. These things are what make local Smash games with friends so much fun. Is it a celebration of Nickelodeon? Not really. A sizable number of iconic characters are missing, and just on a pure numbers basis, the game can't even compete with platform fighters released in the PS3 360 Wii era. The moves and taunts being almost entirely references to the shows was a great touch and a step in the right direction, but no cool story mode combined with the unfulfilling roster makes it fall flat. Most importantly, there's just not a whole lot to do in this game. I can see All-Star Brawl falling off very quickly. It's got local play, online play, and arcade mode, and that's about it. Ludosity were just too focused on being a competitive esports title in my opinion. The companies involved in making this game were clearly aware of this focus too. Go look at their marketing, it was a deliberate choice. In the days leading up to release, it was entirely focused on drawing in Smash competitive players. Reviewers only got sent review code for the game hours before the game was released in North America. Due to time zones, I got the game about half a day earlier than North Americans. This also meant I technically got the game before reviewers too. The developers creating this game seem less interested in actually making a Nickelodeon Smash, and more on making a game that will be picked up as an esport. It's like they're purely leveraging the hype a Nickelodeon Smash clone would generate in an attempt to break into the competitive space. It just all feels a little confused. They've made a game for Smash Bros purists based on Nickelodeon that just inherently seems like a disconnect. They completely missed the point of what makes Smash Bros fun to a wide audience. I don't think they realise that the crazy, hardcore esports audience of Smash are the tiniest minority. Ultimately, I think this is a very competent fighter that is nearly completely devoid of soul. It doesn't have that special essence that makes Smash such a magical franchise that transcends time. Congratulations, you were able to recreate the Smash fighting mechanics really well. What else? So much of what makes Smash special has nothing to do with the actual fighting. If you're looking for that fun multiplayer party experience that Smash provides, you'll probably be disappointed here at least a little. If you're just looking for a new fighting game esports title to pick up, you'll probably love this.
While I have been incredibly harsh on the overall package of Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, there's no denying that this is an S-tier game from a pure gameplay perspective. However, I can't in good faith place this in S-tier. The first All-Star Brawl was just so devoid of anything to do unless you were 100% focused on online play, and I personally found the crossover elements to be lacking, and the overall presentation didn't have the kind of charm I expected to see. Despite that, the gameplay is so good that I have to put it in A tier.
I love Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis. It's not a perfect game, it has plenty of flaws that I'd love to see tweaked over the game's lifespan, but the stuff it gets right is so good. Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis is a pretty stock standard arcadey tennis game when you look at the base gameplay. Anybody who's picked up the Mario Tennis series or Hot Shots Tennis will be familiar with what's going on. You've got the base rules of tennis applied here, with the only actual major tweak to the format being the length of the matches shrunk down. It's just a race to be the first one to score 7 points. All the various change-ups for your shots are present: top spin, side spin, drops and lobs. It's tennis. Actually aiming the shots can take some getting used to, at least when using a controller. I played with a DualSense, but it might be different with the touch controls. Hell, most games that feature a player base that cross-plays with mobile generally sees the mobile players able to achieve way more than their console or PC counterparts, so that's likely to be the case here too. Aiming just feels a little stiff at first, but once I got half a dozen games under my belt, it felt natural and I didn't have an issue with it from that point on. The name of the game here is Timing. Well, the name of the game is actually Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis, but you know what I mean. Timing your shot just right will give you a perfect shot, which is much harder for the opponent to return. It's particularly satisfying to pull off a perfect drop shot and see your opponent madly scramble to try and reach it. Nailing a perfect shot is all about waiting until the last second to let go of the shot button. When the ball is in your immediate vicinity, you'll hold down the button, and then just as it's about to reach your racket, you let go. On paper it sounds super easy to pull off, and after playing for a few hours you'll be ripping off perfect shots regularly, but in the heat of a match it's actually surprisingly tough to nail down. Because this is a Nintendo party game style title, there are numerous power-ups you'll encounter during matches. In true Mario Kart fashion, question mark blocks will pop up at random intervals, and hitting these with a ball will give you a power-up. These are almost always dedicated to making your opponent's life a misery. The slime power-up drops a slime puddle wherever the ball lands, allowing you to coax your opponent into it with the following shots, which latches onto them and then slows them down. The toy ball will stun your opponent if they come into contact with it, and the iron ball will push them back further when they play a shot. The gameplay's cherry on top comes in the form of super energy. Every single shot you play stockpiles this energy, filling up a gauge that has 3 different thresholds. When the first 2 parts of the gauge are filled, you get a dash ability to use. This is your last resort option for when the opposing player has got you on the ropes and looks like they're going to score a point. Drop a dash and your character will zoom over to the ball and automatically return it, no matter where you were or what shot was played. But the fun really starts when it's completely filled. Taking a cue from Super Smash Bros, each character has an ultimate shot. This shot is close to unplayable, but I love that the devs allowed for you to be able to return it as long as you have some pinpoint timing. Additionally, an ultimate shot can be used directly after another ultimate shot, which will automatically return it. It's like stacking draw 4s in a 1v1 game of Uno. It makes for this tense cat and mouse game when both players have their super energy gauge filled. Neither player wants to go first and give up that advantage. It's also just anime as f when these moments happen. As you can see, every ultimate shot leads to an over-the-top animation that pays homage to the specific character using it. One of my favourites was Michelangelo's. When I used it for the first time and saw the 3 other turtles pop up, I got excited like I was a school kid again. I can without a doubt say the core gameplay is really fun. Not the most complex systems at play here, but the matches are a blast, particularly when you're facing a human player, but I'll touch on that more later. As for single player, the game is entirely centered around story mode. This is essentially just your typical arcade mode you'd see in a fighter. Each character has their own unique tournament to play through. It's not revolutionary, but the game at least tries to make it a little less dull. Every matchup gives you a couple of challenges to try and complete. Stuff like play this type of shot X amount of times or dash X amount of times. These challenges are actually the most important part of story mode. You can go through and win all of the matches, but you won't get the reward without beating the challenges. Doing this nets the player an exclusive cosmetic item. Nothing crazy, but it's nice to actually have some purpose to this mode. It's not without considerable flaws though. The challenges create a number of clunky issues. Firstly, the devs need to patch in a way to view your challenges mid-match as soon as possible. Currently, you're forced to just memorize them, which is less than ideal. And at their core, the challenges aren't exactly fun to do. Most of them slip over into being annoying. Part of that annoyance is that the single player content is way too easy. Any player with half a brain will trounce most AI opponents 7-0. It gets so easy that it can often be a struggle to complete all of your challenges before winning. So many times I had to just toy with my opponent so I could use a certain amount of power-ups or do whatever the challenge was asking me to do. They've got the right idea with this mode, but the execution needs some tweaking. One of the most interesting things about Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis is that it's designed like a live service game. But like I mentioned earlier, Apple Arcade games aren't allowed to have microtransactions, so this setup is actually pretty great. So you start the game with one character. Naturally it's SpongeBob, but as you play the game you'll level up, gain experience and unlock new characters, with Danny being the final character for some strange reason. Would have thought Garfield would be the last one, but hey, I ain't complaining. All of this runs on a Battle Pass style system. Every time you level up you get something new, even if it isn't a character. Battle Pass has become a bit of a dirty term in gaming. I actually think Battle Passes are great, as long as they're done right, which I guess is the case for every idea ever. A great Battle Pass that constantly feeds the player new things is extremely rewarding, but you've got to make sure there's a nice balance between how quickly you rank up. I could talk all day about the way these things are designed, but all you really need to know is that it's tricky to get right when actual money is at play. I've played numerous games with this system in place, with Pokemon Unites being a bit of a mess due to a lack of meaningful rewards, but when I was in my Fortnite and Rocket League phases, I remember really enjoying them. However, when you remove the aspect of having to purchase the Battle Pass or the entire concept of microtransactions, what you have here is such a cool way to make the player constantly feel like they're being rewarded. So much of this game is tied to this. You start out with a limited number of power-ups and needing to unlock the rest of them over time. You're even limited to what kind of shots you can play at first, with these tied to Battle Pass progression, although you do get them pretty quickly. This might be divisive to some players, and that's understandable. It's easy to feel disadvantaged when somebody has access to power-ups you don't have. When it comes to the shots though, this drip feed system almost feels like a great way to ease you into the game. Every time you unlock a new one, you get a tutorial, which spaces them out nicely and doesn't overwhelm you with an info dump at the start. Along with leveling up your profile, you'll also be leveling up each individual character. Characters have stats like speed and strength that alter the way they play, and yes, these stats do actually matter. Taking your character up against another character that's had much more time put into it will be a bit of a battle. Every game you play gives you experience points, so it always feels like you're working towards something. Also, without microtransactions, it's nice to know that people earn their high stats by playing, not just dumping money. Your rackets have stats too, which are upgraded in a similar manner. Assisting in the leveling up is the multitude of challenges found in Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis. These are referred to as quests by the game, with there being general quests and then character-specific quests. On top of that, you have daily quests and then weekly events, although those are focused around grabbing an exclusive pair of gear rather than leveling up your character or your overall profile. It really feels like this game was designed as your typical live service game, but without the microtransactions. It's odd, but it works. Each point you score nets a gold ball. Collect enough of these and you'll unlock a points bag, which is basically this game's version of loot boxes. Again though, no money involved. It's all of the endorphin rush of loot boxes with none of the predatory money stuff. Here you'll gain experience for characters and rackets, as well as new cosmetic items for your characters. Each character has head, torso and shoe options available for customization, and characters can mix and match these. I think I like this over a typical skin or alt costume type setup. Hell yeah, I want to make my characters look as ridiculous as possible. I also really like that the AI gets to join in on this fun. Most games would keep them in their generic forms, but here they're able to jump in and completely randomize their costumes. This is how you get Garfield looking fresh with a pair of slides and a chef's hat. Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis ensures players aren't let down by unlocking duplicate items too. When you have 3 duplicate items, you can fuse them, and the game just straight up gives you a rare cosmetic for it. Pretty neat. Most games with loot boxes have some sort of system like this, but I think this is my favourite execution. This game is constantly rewarding the player with new stuff. It's a real shot to the endorphins when you're always leveling something up, getting new items, beating challenges. There's an absolute glut of content here. Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis was clearly designed to have you coming back constantly, rather than just beating it in a weekend. Believe it or not, online play is actually a crucial aspect of this game. Most players will jump in, play SpongeBob's story mode, level up enough to unlock Michelangelo, play his story, then hit a wall. You haven't unlocked a new character, so what's there to do? Well, the game funnels you to online matches. Playing these matches will keep you on that upgrade treadmill with the added bonus that they're a lot more competitive than the AI. I actually really like this gameplay loop. Play some tournaments, hone your skills, get forced online to play actual players, then repeat. It works. In my experience, online matches get really tense. This match I had with a Garfield player had me on the edge of my seat. I had at least half a dozen stories of incredible matches in my relatively short time playing the game. It might not have the gameplay depth of an all-star Brawl, but this is a superior online experience. Naturally, as you play, you rank up. The game has an overall rank for your account and a rank for your specific characters. They try to match you with players of a similar skill level, and it works okay. There were a few too many times I was getting matched up with people who had no idea what they were doing, and I felt really bad beating them 7-0. On the flip side, there were times I'd match up with players way out of my league. Seeing somebody using Arnold, I'd just know I was in for an ass kicking because you need to put in a decent chunk of hours to get to him. Coming up against highly leveled characters with raised stats can legitimately put you in an unwinnable situation. I faced a cat dog that was way over leveled compared to me, and despite being able to rally with him for long periods of time, he'd inevitably take the point because his superior stats had me on the back foot the entire time. It was the most competitive 7-0 beating of all time. I think this is an issue that needs to be addressed, but this could also be stemming from the fact that the game is still in its infancy. It's been out for like a week, and the level gap between players is just so wide at the moment. What is a non-negotiable is addressing the lag. For the most part, matches run fine, and finding a game is smoother than it ever was for All-Star Brawl, even when that game had an actual player base. When you do get the occasional laggy match, this game is unplayable. The ball teleporting around makes the match a complete roll of the dice. Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis has such a fun online experience. If they can tweak the matchmaking and tidy up the lag, it would be close to perfect. Okay, it's time to address the elephant in the room. I'm talking about the supposed preferential treatment that made a lot of people shit their pants. Let's look at the roster. We've got just 10 characters covering just 9 shows, with Hey Arnold getting 2 reps for some reason. It's an underwhelming showing, but considering this is a mobile-focused title, it was probably to be expected. I also have a sneaking suspicion that they plan on dropping an entirely new battle pass with more characters later on based on the way it's all set up currently. It's a shame that they didn't include more characters. A bigger roster would make the battle pass flow a little nicer, and the characters aren't exactly complex as they don't have unique movesets outside of a passive ability and their ultimate shot. You get your standard stuff like the courts being themed after the shows here too, although I don't think every show gets a court. Off the top of my head, I didn't see a Danny Phantom court or a Garfield court. And then there's probably the biggest sticking point for All-Star Brawl fans: voice acting. Extreme Tennis didn't get new voice acting, as far as I could tell, but there are voice lines here. I've made my stance clear on this in the past. I don't really care if a kart racer or Smash clone or tennis game doesn't have voice acting, but I'm aware I'm in the minority. The issue is, these games always run into the problem of having the voice clips be so repetitive. I was ready for the characters to never talk ever again after like an hour. Be careful what you wish for, people. The question on everyone's lips is, why did this game get preferential treatment? Honestly, I don't have a concrete answer. Why did this game get to write its own unique dialogue for the story mode? No idea. I think some of the preferential treatment just actually came down to two different developers making two different games with two different priorities. Extreme Tennis has an extensive suite of customizable cosmetics because they wanted it. They still follow the Nickelodeon rule of needing the characters to wear canonical clothing, at least as far as I'm aware. All-Star Brawl's priorities were so clearly focused on the gameplay and competitive stuff that everything else was an afterthought. I have no doubt they wanted to include some of these things, but nothing I've seen from the devs makes it feel like they were a high priority. The best explanation I have for this situation is that Nickelodeon had previously worked with the developer here before, Old Skull Games. They developed SpongeBob Patty Pursuit. Nick knew they could trust them, so they were more flexible. Additionally, I don't think we should count out how big of a player the Apple Arcade deal is. I could imagine this exclusivity deal netted them a bunch of cash. Nick has supported Apple Arcade pretty strongly, so I wouldn't be surprised if that was a big factor here. Ultimately, Extreme Tennis has these features and All-Star Brawl doesn't. Learn to live with it, I guess. Lastly, I wanted to touch on the visuals and animations. It's not the prettiest game ever, but I really like the direction they went in with the style. All of these characters from vastly different 2D art styles somehow work together. Characters run around the court in their own unique style, they get unique victory and defeat animations. I feel like they get a lot of life out of these characters in what is basically just a tennis game. What started as me being skeptical of a seemingly throwaway Mario tennis game by Nick has ended up blowing me away. Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis is fun as hell. There's so much to do here that it's honestly kind of insane at times that it's an Apple Arcade game without any microtransactions. This game would have made bank just on the App Store normally, so I hope they secured the bag from Apple. There is genuinely more content here than in All-Star Brawl, and you could probably even make the argument that it has more content than Nick Kart Racers 2. It needs a few tweaks to some notable problem areas, but I was pleasantly surprised by my experience here. The devs clearly put so much passion into this.
This is probably going to catch a lot of people off guard, but Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis is the first Nick crossover game to reach S tier. This was one of the biggest surprises I've ever had since I started covering Nickelodeon games. I expected this to be shovelware trash, and it turned out to be a really fun spin on the Mario Tennis formula. We definitely could have used some more characters on the roster, even with the character updates, and playing against the AI is way too easy, but outside of that, the game is pretty damn great. It's a true shame that most people will never play this because it's stuck on Apple Arcade, without any hope of a console or PC port. Just like Grand Prix, Slime Speedway eases you into the game with a forced tutorial. While this game mostly plays the same as its predecessor, there are a number of crucial gameplay tweaks that make this tutorial not totally redundant if you've played the previous game. Firstly, you'll now come across orange slime at certain parts of each track. Driving through this upgrades some items that you'll pick up. Then there are the slime slides, which seem to be an idea ripped from Mario Kart 8, albeit not as unique or well done. These slides are basically an on-rails section where you occasionally need to jump over obstacles. Sometimes the slides are a forced part of the track, but more often than not these are placed as sort of secret paths you need to veer off into. When you're on the slime slide, your slime meter will fill up, so it really does pay off to seek them out. But while the slime slides are usually treated like this super secret awesome shortcut, their placement is usually so obvious and easy to get to that it might as well just be part of the standard track. We've also got a bunch of water sections added to tracks now, which transforms your vehicle into a watercraft temporarily. Apparently this was present in the OG game, but it was removed for Grand Prix, and now Bamtang has brought it back in a big way. They went way overboard with the water though. It feels like most tracks now have a water section, whether it makes any sense for that track's theme to have it or not. It feels like a bit of a misstep. The water sections could have been a great addition if they were used occasionally for tracks that make sense to have them, but spamming them across so many just makes it all feel run-of-the-mill. Another Mario Kart idea they've added in is the option to choose between a standard kart or a bike to race on. When you pick between these two for the first time, the game explains that the bikes will generally have superior handling and speed stats, while karts are handy if you're looking for a more all-rounder option. And this leads me to the game's kart and bike customization, which is impressively deep. In Slime Speedway, you'll pick between a kart and a bike, which type of kart or bike you want, and then customize it via its wheels and exhaust, topping it off with a shiny new paint job. In the last game, choosing your kart's body was tied to your specific character that you had chosen, but Slime Speedway opens this up so that any character can use any body. This is all on top of the fact that each character has their own set of unique stats. You can do a lot of tinkering here to find a setup that complements the way that you want to play. And this is all without me having mentioned the pit crew system yet. If you played Grand Prix, you'll be familiar with this idea. You basically pick a perk loadout for every race. You start with a crew chief who has a really powerful ability that you need to collect slime in order to activate. Then you've got two other pit members that provide less powerful but constantly regenerating abilities. Slime Speedway boasts up to 90 crew members, but I'm not entirely sure how many are available in the base game. There's a deluxe version of the game called the Turbo Edition, which amongst other things, seems to come with exclusive pit crew characters and kart parts. Either way, there is a crazy amount of customization here, and once again I have to gush about the pit crew system like I did in my Grand Prix review. It's a genius idea, and one that I feel gives the racing a greater layer of strategy than Mario Kart. Let's not kid ourselves, Mario Kart is the undisputed GOAT series of the kart racing genre, but the pit crew system feels like something that gives Slime Speedway a slight leg up. Trying to put together 3 crew members that complement each other is a big part of the fun here. Early on, I settled into a groove by using Hugh, who gives you a free homing football item with every item you pick up, and Valerie, who gives you a speed boost every time you hit somebody with an item. These two work together so well because I'd nail somebody with the football and then immediately I'd get a speed boost. As I started unlocking more pit crew members, I started mentally putting together other setups that would work so well together. With Slime Speedway boasting so much customization, you'd be forgiven for being a little overwhelmed by it all. Thankfully, Bamtang has tried to address this by allowing you to save presets for your races. You get 5 slots to use, and I think this is a nice way to encourage players to experiment with different setups without worrying about forgetting which particular setup worked well. On top of that, the game just automatically remembers what setup you used last, even when you've shut the game down and restarted it. I came back the next day, and when I started up my first race, Slime Speedway had auto-selected every option I had used in my final race the day before. Such a handy quality of life feature to have in a game like this. Unfortunately though, it looks like we've lost a feature I really enjoyed from Grand Prix, which allowed you to press a button and the game would give you a suggested setup based on which character you had picked. I've got no idea why they would remove this. It was a great way to take the work out of setting up your kart if all you wanted to do was jump into a race. As for the actual kart racing, well, it's once again very solid. If you're a kart racing snob who can't stand anything other than Mario Kart, then yeah, this probably isn't for you. But to me, the racing handles fine and I don't have any serious gripes with it. And Bamtang once again peppers in a bunch of fan service alongside the gameplay, which was something I really loved about Grand Prix. It felt like a love letter to the history of Nickelodeon, something All-Star Brawl really failed to do. They continued that here with small additions like changing the item box to be the Kids' Choice Awards blimp. Small things like that go a long way. Speaking of items, you've got a few new ones here to sink your teeth into, but for the most part you've got a similar slate as the last game, and most of them will be reminiscent of stuff you've seen in other kart races. I think they need to do a better job of not giving you OP items while in the lead though. They're not giving you the super broken ones that are generally reserved for people in last place, but I think a system like Mario Kart is necessary. As it stands, you're able to protect your lead too easily with what you're given sometimes. And occasionally, the opposition AI will bug out too. The best case was when I noticed that Jimmy seemed to be racing backwards at one point. When
it comes to single player, Slime Speedway is a familiar experience. You've got Slime Scramble, which is just a renamed cup mode, free race, time trial, challenges, and arcade. It's the exact setup brought across from Grand Prix. I think it's a decent single player offering, but I'm still wishing for a Crash Team Racing style story mode. Something like that is desperately missing from modern kart races, and I think Nickelodeon would be perfectly poised to do that with their Nicktoons Unite history and all that. Slime Scramble is a typical cup mode. Different difficulty options are available to choose as you race through 10 different cups featuring 4 tracks each. The final cup repeats 4 tracks for some unknown reason, which means you've got 36 unique tracks to choose from in Slime Speedway. That's 8 more than the previous game, and 19 of these tracks are brand new. However, we've also lost 10 or so tracks from the previous game, which is a little baffling. I'd love to know the reasoning behind them being dropped. It feels like it would be super easy to just bring them over. Maybe the devs ran out of time because the returning tracks have been reworked a bit to feature the new gameplay additions. All of the old tracks have had slime paths added, while many of them have also had extensive water sections dropped in. Playing through the cups on normal difficulty will be an absolute breeze if you have any experience with kart races. To be fair, it felt like the normal difficulty was a little bit more challenging than the equivalent difficulty in Grand Prix, but it's still not a challenge. For me, the fast level was the sweet spot of difficulty. It wasn't ridiculously difficult, but I also wasn't curb stomping the AI in every single race. Each race you go through in Slime Scramble will present you with a couple of pre-race challenges, which the game refers to as double dares. As far as I could tell, these don't really do anything. At the end of a cup, the game hands out 3 awards and you get 10 coins for winning one of these, but the game isn't consistent with what awards are handed out. Sometimes somebody will get an award for completing the most double dares, but more often than not, 3 other awards will be there instead. It's very flawed. As far as I could tell, I wasn't getting any coins or anything when completing these double dares, so it really begged the question of why they were even there. Maybe I'm missing something. Once you speed through all 10 cups on a difficulty level successfully, you'll get a really strange cutscene. Firstly, it's really low res for some reason. Secondly, it plays out while the typical end of cup presentation music is playing, which gives it an even weirder vibe. And that's not even mentioning that the whole premise of the cutscene is odd. A bunch of characters are all shown racing, then Zim steals the trophy and they drive off after him. It feels like it would be the opening cutscene for the game, but that opening cutscene already exists and is so much better than this. The other single player mode you'll be spending the most time with is likely to be challenge mode, which is a fun distraction. It's also how you unlock half a dozen of the game's characters, so you're kind of forced to do it. Basically, you have 6 different tiers, each filled with a bunch of race challenges that force you to do unique things while using pre-selected characters and loadouts. The challenges are relatively simple and replicate a lot of the double dare stuff, like doing 2 blue drifts and then winning the race. But forcing different characters and loadouts gets you out of your comfort zone and experimenting with setups you might not otherwise have tried. When you get to the end of each tier, you have a boss race like Crash Team Racing, where you unlock that character upon winning. It's a fine mode, but if they make a 4th game and bring this back, they really need to think of some better challenges. A lot of them are dull. The worst was the challenge to overtake 5 racers.
Don't forget me. Sorry, didn't see you there.
I've touched on them very briefly, but let's dive deeper into Slime Speedway's roster, unlockables, and how it fares as a crossover of Nickelodeon's iconic shows. Starting out, you only have access to 12 different races, which is actually 4 less than in Grand Prix. There are a few different routes you'll have to take in order to unlock the full roster. The most obvious is via the slime tokens. In every race, you'll pick up slime tokens which raise your top speed and fill up your slime meter. But on top of that, the amount of tokens you have once you finish the race is awarded to you to keep. You can grab a maximum of 10 tokens per race.
But unlocking a character requires 150 to 200 tokens, which obviously translates to 15 to 20 races to unlock one character. This can be boosted a little by doing the cups, where you can get some extra tokens for winning the end of cup awards, but that doesn't help a whole lot. I don't know if I'm just misremembering my time with Grand Prix, but Slime Speedway feels super grindy to unlock the roster, especially when you take into account that there's a bunch of kart customization options that also need to be purchased with tokens. After completing 2 entire Slime Scramble playthroughs on separate difficulty levels, I still had a bunch of characters I'd need to grind up to purchase, and that was with me not spending a single token on anything other than characters. Being so focused on unlocking the characters also meant other aspects of the unlockables were being severely neglected. You start with 2 body types for karts and 2 for bikes, and unlocking new styles is mostly tied to slime tokens. I'm sure this has been planned out to try and promote players sticking with the game for a longer period of time, but it feels like a bit of a miscalculation. It's too grindy for my tastes. Thankfully, not every unlockable character is put behind a slime token paywall. As I mentioned, 6 characters are earned through the challenge mode, and there also seems to be other characters linked to beating certain cups, although the game isn't very upfront about this. Overall, the base game has 40 characters, and if you purchase the Turbo Edition, you would get Zuko and an Eastman and Laird reskin of Raphael. It's currently unknown whether people who bought the base game will ever actually get the chance to have these 2 characters. Characters in Slime Speedway that are making their debut include Susie Carmichael, Powdered Toast Man, Oblina, Squidina Star, Camper SpongeBob and Patrick, Jimmy, Cindy, Jenny, Toph, Zuko if you paid for him, April O'Neil, Garfield, and Odie. I was initially pretty disappointed that 2 roster spots were taken for Camp Coral's version of SpongeBob and Patrick, but that immediately ended when I saw how damn adorable they look when riding the bikes. But bizarrely, the entire roster from Grand Prix doesn't return here, which, like the tracks, doesn't make much sense to me. Actually, it makes less sense to me here. Unlike the tracks, which had to have some structural changes, the characters are literally the same between 2 and 3. Angelica, Heifer, Shredder, and Tommy don't return. No idea why, but it feels weird to have a recolor of Reptar make it in over them. And if they're sold back to the player via DLC, I'm going to be kind of mad. At the very least, we know Shredder and Heifer won't be returning, as they've been downgraded to pit crew characters for some reason. Overall, Slime Speedway's roster covers 16 different franchises, with new franchises being Garfield, My Life as a Teenage Robot, Jimmy Neutron, and Real Monsters. Thankfully, we didn't lose any franchises here. For comparison, Grand Prix had 30 races from 12 different franchises, so the roster is an improvement, even if there is some baffling decisions being made here. As has often been the case with recent Nick crossover games, it would have been nice to see a little more representation for their more recent shows. And classic shows like Angry Beavers, Wild Thornberrys, Rocket Power, As Told by Ginger, and Fairly Odd Parents are glaring omissions. The actual tracks here are generally pretty solid, even if they do have those issues with the slime slides and an overuse of water that I mentioned earlier. But there are some bigger issues with specific tracks. I encountered this glitch on Ba Sing Se where I literally could not go up the ramps. It also felt like the AI knew about this glitch, because for all 3 laps of that race, they all were seemingly avoiding these ramps for no other apparent reason. The Rocko's Modern Life Nature Orama track continues to be one of the most boring tracks in existence, and then there's the Turtle Lair track. This is legitimately a ripoff of Crash Team Racing's Sewer Speedway, but tweaked to be so much more cramped, and it ends up being easily the worst track in this game. But other than those 2, I enjoyed pretty much every track in the game. Okay, so if you've been following me for a while, you'll know my thoughts on voice acting in these kinds of games. It's really not important to me, but multiverses sort of changed my mind because of the way characters interacted with each other via their lines. It was so much more interesting than generic quips. One of Slime Speedway's big marketing points was the voices, and unfortunately, they're nowhere near the level of multiverses. In fact, I hate the voice acting here. This game is way too quippy,
And most of the lines are so damn inane. Please just shut the up for like 5 seconds. It was particularly bad when playing as Toph. She might be blind, but the girl sure can talk.
I'll do it, Snoozles! What on earth was that? I felt that. Sometimes you gotta pamper yourself. Hurry up! Almost there, Toph.
Camper Patrick's lines were absolutely brutal to sit through.
That just blew my mind!
And then Aang's voice sounds so incredibly off, while also saying some of the weirdest lines in the game.
I gotta stay flaming. Hey! Gravity!
So yeah, you guys got what you wished for. Hope you enjoy it. Thankfully, you can switch the voice acting off via the menu, which is how I'll be playing this game from now on. And then the overall graphics look pretty great. Tracks look really nice and have clearly taken advantage of the boost in power for next-gen consoles, while the character models also look great. Except Sandy, who is weirdly small, the UI looks a lot slicker compared to Grand Prix as well. The visual presentation is pretty much a unanimous improvement, as long as you ignore Arnold's cup-winning animation. Slime Speedway is mostly an incremental upgrade over Grand Prix, but it's a game I would definitely recommend you buy if you love Nickelodeon. Heck, I'd recommend you check it out even if you're not a huge Nick fan, but you do have the itch for a kart racer that was released in modern times. The gameplay's tight and has so much depth, the roster is good, and there's plenty for you to do here. While Slime Speedway is a step up from Grand Prix, it's only a very incremental step up, and it sucks to say it's not enough to place it in S tier. The random loss of some of the characters present in the previous game is really lame, and the fact that it's so grindy to unlock the full roster really left a bad taste in my mouth. But the fact of the matter is, the gameplay continues to get incrementally better with these releases, and it's so easy to say that Slime Speedway is the best karting experience in Nick's history. So with all of that said, we've got to place it in A tier. Released in November of 2023, just over 2 years after the original, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2 set out to try and address a lot of the most common complaints with the original game. Now, one of the things I didn't have an issue with the original game was the gameplay. As far as I was concerned, the original game was the best non-Smash Bros platform fighter ever released at the time. However, it seems like the devs themselves weren't happy with it, because allegedly 98% of the game was made entirely from scratch, rather than being built off of the original game, which seems insane to me. Character movesets were already super expansive in the original game, providing the kind of depth you usually wouldn't find in a Smash clone. With this rebuilt game, the movesets are once again expansive, with some new wrinkles thrown in like horizontal attacks, aerial dodging, and dodge rolling. But after playing a bunch of All-Star Brawl 2, I cannot for the life of me figure out why they apparently scrapped most of their work from the first game. The only explanation I can come up with is that the devs were once again trying to chase and appease the hardcore competitive community. This was a major focus of the development of the first game, and personally, I think this focus made the game worse in a lot of ways. It feels like it's back here again, which you'll see the further we dive into All-Star Brawl 2. One of the biggest new gameplay mechanics is the introduction of the slime meter, which fills up as you deal out damage. It feels like a borrowed mechanic from PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, but instead of just unleashing super moves, the slime meter has multiple different uses. If you use one bar of the slime meter, you can enhance your special moves, dealing out a powerful variant that changes things like damage, size, recovery distance, or various other elements. Using a single bar can also unlock slime cancelling, which allows you to instantly cancel the end lag of any attack, allowing you to move straight into another action. If you slime cancel right next to an opponent, it'll freeze them, although any attack used right after slime cancelling will be weaker than usual. Lastly, you can also air dash with a single bar of slime meter, which is pretty self-explanatory.
For 2 bars of slime meter, you can use a slime burst, which gives you the opportunity to save yourself when launched by an attack. Activate your slime burst and you could potentially recover from what would have been a KO. It also can cancel out of combos your opponent is pulling off. And finally, you can spend all 3 bars of slime meter on what is essentially a final smash. On the surface, this seems cool, but after playing around with them a bit, I was majorly disappointed. Firstly, for something that requires your full bar, these level 3 supers are not an instant kill on your opponent, they'll regularly survive. Secondly, every single super move in the game is exactly the same. Sure, every character has a unique cutscene playout, but it's not like Smash where every single final smash has a unique gameplay element. Instead, you just watch a cutscene play out, and then your opponent goes flying. I also found that actually catching your opponent in a level 3 super is ridiculously touchy. So many times it felt like I was standing on top of my opponent, but when I activated the move, the game would decide that they wouldn't be pulled into it. And then you've got the slime taunt, which you can also spend 3 bars of slime meter on. This does absolutely nothing except add a slime effect to your taunt. It's essentially an utterly pointless addition, and it would only be used by somebody who is absolutely stomping their opponent. And when put like that, it feels like another small thing added purely for the ultra competitive crowd. With all of these new mechanics added and such an in-depth moveset for every character, it's great to see that they added a proper tutorial this time. The first game's slideshow tutorial was laughably bad, so pretty much anything else would have been a step up. I found the tutorial here to be pretty handy, and it allowed me to grasp a lot of the new elements pretty quick. Once I got my bearings and started smashing my way through matches, I could definitely feel the improvements over the first game. Now, did it feel like these improvements were so great that it was worth rebuilding the entire game? Not really. But overall, I think All-Star Brawl 2 once again cements itself as the best non-Smash platform fighter, at least in terms of pure gameplay feel. I bounced around from character to character and really enjoyed how unique the majority of them are and how fun to play they were. Except for Mecha Plankton, I cannot express how awful he feels to me. Might actually be the worst platform fighter character I have ever used. While just playing random matches, you'll find there's a cool mode called Squads, which allows you to take 3 characters into battle, and each character acts as your stock, which was an addition I really appreciated. One of my gripes with the first game's focus on competitive play was that items were completely absent. When jumping into the sequel, you'd be forgiven for thinking they're also absent here, but instead they're just turned off by default. Again, it feels like this choice is them catering to hardcore players, while begrudgingly giving something to filthy casuals like me. When you do turn items on, they're pretty damn lame, and I rarely ever saw an AI opponent use one. Speaking of the AI, they almost never use their slime meter super attacks. All of these little hiccups make the game feel way less chaotic than Smash, which, again, feels like the devs trying to cater to complaints from hardcore platform fighter fans who want some sort of pure fighting experience. I also found the AI to be a little bit too easy, even when set to the highest difficulty. Almost every time I was beating level 9s with ease, which sucks. You don't have to be a genius to have predicted that this game's community would die off pretty quickly, making online matches become a tough task to find. Having a decent offline option could have given the game some extra life, but if I was starting to quickly get bored of the AI, then anybody with a decently high skill level would just uninstall the game. Alright, let's talk about the best parts of a crossover platform fighter, the characters and stages. I was harsh on the original game, which a lot of people weren't happy with at the time. For me personally, it felt like there were a lot of weird choices with the roster, and some very bad omissions. For starters, every single character is unlocked from the beginning. I know a lot of people probably enjoy this, particularly the hardcore crowd, and at a glance I don't have an issue with it. I do think this decision majorly affects the importance and drive to play some of the single player modes though, which I'll get to in a bit. Also, the characters visually look like a major upgrade, which I wasn't expecting. Sure, the jump to next-gen consoles was always going to bring some improvement, but I wasn't banking on it being so noticeable. Overall, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2 features 25 playable characters from 17 different Nickelodeon franchises, which includes 14 returning characters from the first game. 14 of the 25 characters are from SpongeBob, TMNT, and Avatar, which is a massive portion of the roster. This is something that's been infecting Nick crossovers a lot lately, and it was an issue with the first game, but it actually got worse here in the sequel when you look at what percentage of the roster is taken up by just these 3 franchises. As a side note, I'm also sick to death of seeing the classic turtles represented in every damn Nick crossover game. Mutant Mayhem came out right before this game released. We couldn't have got some corporate synergy and seen those versions of the turtles? Continuing on from the original game, the devs still make some very baffling roster decisions, like Ember from Danny Phantom. Ember appears in a handful of Danny Phantom episodes, but I'd hardly call her iconic. There are at least 3 or 4 other Danny Phantom villains I'd put in this game over her if we wanted to go down this path. I'm still baffled by certain franchises being represented here, but not by their main character. The worst cases are Hey Arnold, which is represented by Grandma Gertie and Gerald, but not by Arnold himself. And then there's Reptar being the Rugrats rep, but no actual Rugrats. And don't give me that Nick doesn't want babies in a fighting game BS, because Tommy's appeared in fighting games previously. One of my biggest gripes with the roster is the sheer amount of characters we lost from the first game to the second. CatDog, Helga, Hugh Neutron, Leonardo, Lincoln Loud, Michelangelo, Oblina, Powdered Toast Man, Sandy, Shredder, and Toph were all left behind. This is probably a direct cause of a lot of this game being rebuilt, but honestly, I would have rathered we kept those characters on the roster compared to receiving what were ultimately very minor gameplay improvements. Overall, the most notable Nicktoons that are still missing are Real Monsters, CatDog, Rocket Power, and Fairly Odd Parents. The first 2 could have been represented here if they weren't left behind in the first game. There's also As Told by Ginger, but I have no idea how you'd make any of those characters work here. That show was just way too down to earth. Despite my gripes, the roster is pretty good here. 4 characters were added to the base roster as DLC throughout 2024, and every character had full voice acting from the get-go, which was a major controversy for the first game. As for the stages, well, it's a mixed bag. I quite enjoyed what's on offer here, but it's barely an improvement from the first game. We've got 26 stages here compared to 25 from All-Star Brawl 1, and only 13 stages returned from the first game. I get some of the characters being left behind, but the stages being omitted seems kinda weird to me. One of the biggest things missing from the original Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl was stuff to actually, do in the game. You had a pretty dull arcade mode, and then that was it. All you could do was play online, in theory at least. In reality, I could hardly find a match at launch. The devs have tried to rectify this in a big way here, with several single-player modes, the most notable of them being the campaign. This is a single-player, story-driven mode that takes elements of roguelikes and has you square off against notable Nicktoon villains, with everything being driven by Vlad Plasmius. Side note, am I the only one who's had a Berenstain Bears moment with this guy and thought for sure his name was Vlad Plasmius for years? No? Anyone? Just me? Okay then. When you kick off the campaign, you'll be forced to play as SpongeBob as you're introduced to the story. It seems there's multiversal shenanigans going on, which Vlad Plasmius seems to be the mastermind behind. But who cares about that when we've got legitimate cutscenes to get hype over? Sure, these cutscenes are pretty basic, but they bring so much life to the campaign, and it's honestly way more than I ever could have asked for. As the beginning of the story unfolds, you'll quickly find yourself dropped into a hub area called the Timeless Star Dial. Here you'll encounter another Danny Phantom character, Clockwork, who will be your guide for the campaign. In the hub, you'll get to choose your character before jumping into a run, which in all reality is basically just an arcade mode that's been dressed up real fancy. There are different nodes that you'll play through with different challenges. Some will ask you to defeat a bunch of cannon fodder enemies, some will ask you to complete platforming or combat challenges, and others will take you to a 1v1 against an actual roster character. Beating one of these will then unlock that character to be selected when back at the hub world. As you progress through these nodes, you'll notice branching paths, where you can have some limited choice over what future nodes you encounter. It also decides which power-up shops you run into. Every run will see you gathering 3 types of currency. Blimps and slimies will be used throughout your run to power up your character and give you different abilities. The third currency, Splat, can be spent back at the hub world to unlock new permanent upgrades or to just unlock new cosmetics for the hub world. As with any roguelike, once you die, your run is over, and you head back to the hub world, armed with increased knowledge of the game's world, and usually with some sort of abilities that you can carry over into the next run. I will admit, a roguelike fighting game campaign is a cool idea. I just don't think Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2 nails it. I think the biggest issues are A, repeating what is essentially a glorified arcade mode over and over is not that fun, and B, I think the devs realized this and made the campaign brain dead easy. Without an expansive world you can explore and slowly discover secrets and knowledge that fuels future runs, the roguelike nature of All-Star Brawl 2's campaign is not that fun. Slogging through the same dull nodes just doesn't have that much appeal to it. Now, I could have seen this being slightly compensated for if the campaign unlocks some important stuff that players would care about, but as I already mentioned, every single character is unlocked from the beginning, so the only thing of worth you get from the campaign is costumes, which are kinda cool, but not a strong enough pool, at least in my opinion. The brain dead easy part of the campaign really stems from the power-ups you'll pick up during runs. On one of my first runs, I decided I was only going to buy power-ups that improved the effectiveness of my charge attacks. After buying 2 or 3 of these, my character became extremely broken, to the point where I was completing nodes in my sleep. To emphasize just how bad it is, I was taking out boss battles in like 30 seconds, and by the end of one of my runs as Jenny, I could defeat a 1v1 in 3 hits. Completing a run of the campaign requires you to beat a couple of boss battles and then defeat Vlad Plasmius, but the game doesn't end there. Once you complete your first run, you'll get a bit more story, with some convoluted explanation that forces you to go through another run of the campaign. The only thing of real note that changes on this second run is the boss battles. By this point, you've figured out how to cheese the campaign, and the motivation to keep going is pretty minimal. I sleepwalked through my second run of the campaign, and lo and behold, there was another fake out ending. In fact, you better get used to this, because you basically need to do like 4 complete runs of the campaign to actually get to the end. The narrative in All-Star Brawl 2's campaign is genuinely quite fun, and gives me strong Nicktoons Unite vibes, so it's unfortunate that it's buried under a mode that loses steam after about an hour, and is then padded out to an insane degree. Like, there are so many cool touches to the campaign, like Plasmius's cutscene dialogue being tailored to whatever character is facing off against him, but the stuff in between those moments drags on like crazy. There are great twists and turns in the story, and I won't spoil them for those of you that want to play this campaign one day, but the actual experience of playing the campaign is so boring that I'd probably just recommend you watch a YouTube compilation of the story beats. After it's all said and done, you'll unlock a New Game Plus mode, which I could not ever imagine wanting to play. I'll give the devs all the credit in the world for trying something unique with their campaign. They could have just pumped out a generic arcade mode, or even tried a beat-for-beat copy of something that Smash has done before. They took a bold stab at a roguelike campaign, but it just doesn't quite work, at least with their final execution. Heck, after putting some thought into it, I don't know if successfully pulling this campaign off ever would have been possible. They didn't stop at just a campaign though. All-Star Brawl 2 has 4 other single-player game modes, the first of which is a generic arcade mode. While I do appreciate the addition of more single-player content, these modes are not good. Arcade mode has absolutely zero draw to it because there's no rewards here. Maybe if there were specific characters that could be unlocked by doing this, you could justify its existence, but instead, you're basically just doing a more boring version of the campaign. As you go through arcade, they try to spice things up with occasional handicap matches, but even this is a bit weird, because sometimes the handicap is in your favor. Like, what's the actual point of that? You're given 3 stock to clear the entire mode, and you'll run into boss battles that have been ripped straight from the campaign. But also, losing stock doesn't have any major repercussions. Once you lose all your stock, you can just continue from where you were. I'm guessing this lowers your score or whatever, but who gives a shit when you don't unlock anything meaningful for playing this? It'll take you like 15 minutes to run through arcade, and thank God, because there's no reason to spend any more than 15 minutes in that game mode. Next up, we've got a boss rush mode, compiling all of the boss battles from the campaign into a single gauntlet. It's a fine idea, but the boss battles here are awful. I didn't fully realize this in the campaign because I was so OP and took down bosses so quick that I really didn't get a great look at them. Fighting against them here as generic characters with no power-ups really exposes how dull they are. Most bosses, no joke, just stand around doing nothing for 90% of the fight. The worst culprit for this is actually Plasmius. It also made me kinda mad that these characters weren't just a part of the normal roster. It's not like in Smash where you get some crazy, massively oversized bosses who obviously wouldn't be part of the roster. Most of the time the bosses are just some guy who wouldn't be out of place next to SpongeBob and Danny Phantom. Hell, Shredder was in the last game. Next mode is minigames, which is literally just the chance to play the minigames from the campaign. Then lastly, we have Gauntlet Run. Now this is an actually cool idea. Here you're forced to try and beat the entire roster with a single stock. It's the kind of crazy challenge I used to self-impose when playing games like this as a kid, so it's pretty neat to see something like this officially here. Unfortunately, it suffers from the same thing a lot of this game does. Outside of a tiny bit of self-satisfaction, what is the reward for playing this mode? It genuinely feels like this kind of mode should exist as a way to allow players to unlock new characters or stages, but that's not the case here. And there lies one of the biggest issues with All-Star Brawl 2, and the entirety of the All-Star Brawl franchise in my opinion. It feels like the devs have always tried to develop this as some sort of competitive esports title first and foremost, which means everything is catered towards what competitive players would want. That means every character and stage is unlocked immediately, and the main draw is competing online against other ultra sweaty players. There are some attempts made to throw a bone to more casual players with the campaign, introduction of items, even if they are hidden away, but it all feels like an afterthought. The Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl franchise has so much damn potential, but I personally feel like it's being squandered due to a poor choice of which type of player they're targeting. Now, I may have lobbed a lot of criticisms at All-Star Brawl 2 as a whole, but at the end of the day, the actual platform fighting gameplay here is phenomenal. That's why I've got it in A tier. All of the other stuff surrounding the gameplay is why I can't in good faith move this up to S tier. The single player campaign is at least an attempt at giving casuals something to latch onto, but ultimately it's a bit of a failure. The less said about the other single player modes, the better, but despite all of that, if I boot up the game and play a few rounds, this is undoubtedly a great gameplay experience. Hell, maybe if the level 9 CPUs were a little bit more competent, I could have justified bumping this up to S tier. So the story of Nicktoons and the Dice of Destiny kicks off with Timmy playing a version of Dungeons & Dragons, where he wishes that he could be in a real version of the game. Cosmo and Wanda mess this wish up, apparently due to the use of these dice of power that they randomly have. This messed up wish causes some multiversal shenanigans and brings 8 Nicktoons universes together. Of course, once this happens, Cosmo and Wanda's wish powers immediately stop working. This kind of thing was a staple of the Nicktoons Unite series. Now that you're stranded in a Nicktoons version of Dungeons & Dragons, it's up to you to collect all of the dice of power so you can get back home. To collect these dice, we're going to have to do some good old-fashioned dungeon crawling, with a healthy dose of RPG elements sprinkled in. Gameplay here definitely feels inspired by something like Hades, and it's a genre that is super unique for a Nicktoons game. The original Nicktoons Unite game was clearly inspired by X-Men Legends for its gameplay, so it kind of feels natural to see Dice of Destiny taking inspiration from a super successful game from its own era. Players can jump into Dice of Destiny in single player or local co-op with up to 4 players joining in. I played the entire campaign in single player, and while I love the 4-player co-op option because it really takes me back to the original Unite game, getting a bunch of friends together is going to be an almost impossible task in 2025. Definitely would have loved to see some sort of online element here. As you drop into your first dungeon, you'll get to choose from one of 5 characters, But no matter who you choose, your character's abilities will be quite limited. To start out, you have one basic attack and a dodge roll, and that's basically it. You can also hold the dodge button to run. I chose Leonardo, and he Naruto runs apparently. In true Dungeons & Dragons fashion, characters have an enormous list of stats that alter how they all feel. There's health and mana, damage, defense, evasion, agility, dexterity, intelligence, strength, and critical hit chance stats to upgrade. It's a pretty comprehensive and in-depth stat list, but I can't say the game does a great job teaching you what a lot of these do. Some stats are super obvious, but others like dexterity or intelligence are much more vague, at least to me. As you start hacking, slashing, shooting, or spellcasting through dungeons, you'll find that there are plenty of items that can be equipped to upgrade and personalize throughout your journey. There are weapons to boost various offensive stats, armor to help with defense, as well as buff random things like your speed, talismans that increase pretty much any stat available, consumables that are basically just potions which will buff you for a window of time, and skins, which as far as I'm aware, the only skins in the game at the moment are paid DLC. To add even more depth here, the items you find or purchase can also be upgraded to stronger tiers. Each level in Dice of Destiny generally consists of you mowing down enemies and occasionally having to solve very minor puzzles. These usually involve you activating switches to open doors, which then allow you to progress towards the end of the dungeon. To spice things up, you'll usually find one of these challenge statues in each level, which lock you into an arena with some sort of gimmick in effect, while you're tasked with clearing a set number of enemies out before the time limit runs out. Successfully complete the challenge and you'll see a modifier applied to the amount of items you can pick up from smashing crates and defeating enemies, as well as getting some new loot. Taking down enemies will see your XP grow and you'll eventually level up, which will open up a lot more skills for your character. To go alongside your basic attack and dodge roll, the two other face buttons on your controller can be assigned new skills, as well as the two trigger buttons. These skills require mana to be used, so you can't just spam them uncontrollably, although mana regenerates over time, so you do get to use them constantly. Leveling up quickly sees you have access to more skills than can be equipped, so you start having to decide on which skills you like the most, as well as which skills are most effective in your current situation. They also give you access to an ultimate ability that does insane damage and is usually a fun reference to a moment from one of the shows, or movies in SpongeBob's case. As expected of a game like this, you'll collect gold on your journey, which plays a role after defeating your first dungeon. Completing this will take you to the Tangle, which is your hub world that contains a number of different shops. The first place I ran to was Pearl's Hero Boutique. I was most curious about how the game would handle having access to multiple characters. Would I have to level up each character individually? Nope. Instead, you have a singular level that is applied to all characters, allowing you to switch between dungeons with no drawbacks. My initial idea was that I'd switch between each of the available characters to get a feel for them, and then I'd probably settle on a main for the rest of the game. Instead, I actually found that I enjoyed every character enough that I wanted to switch out characters for every dungeon across the whole game. I cannot express how rare that is for any game, let alone a Nicktoons game. In the Unite series, there were always characters I barely wanted to touch because they felt inferior, but that's not the case for Dice of Destiny. I certainly had characters I liked less than others, but there legitimately isn't a single character here that I would call bad. Combat just feels right with literally every character. There are also great quality of life additions, like making every single item, except consumables, available for use across every character. They could have made things super tedious and had completely separate inventories for every character, which would have hampered the ability to jump back and forth between characters and ultimately push you towards more grinding or side quests. But instead, the devs have tried to put up as few roadblocks between you enjoying every character as possible. Other shops you'll find around the Tangle include a weapon shop run by Carl, a potion shop run by Soccer, and an upgrade shop run by Donatello. Soccer and Donnie's shops use these gem shards as currency, which are certainly a lot harder to come by than gold, and it feels like this is an area of the game where the devs were really pushing you towards doing side quests. Yes, side quests are present here, and it's an aspect where the NPCs in the Tangle play a big part. You'll get Tommy Pickles or Plankton handing out quests, and it's a great way to make yourself a little richer if you're willing to take a brief detour from the main quest. And so quickly you'll find yourself in a tight little gameplay loop. You drop into dungeons, smash up all the enemies, often on your way to acquiring some sort of MacGuffin that allows you to continue your journey, and then you come back to the Tangle to make some upgrades. The loop is satisfying and snappy, as is the combat gameplay. This isn't usually a genre of game I'm drawn to, so I was impressed with how much I was digging the gameplay. Unfortunately, this isn't a perfect game, and I think my biggest issue is the difficulty, or the lack of one to be more specific. When you enter a new dungeon, the game will give you 3 difficulty options. It's basically easy, normal, and hard options, with each of the options showing a recommended level for your character to be before taking it on. I initially started on normal before almost immediately bumping it up to hard. This was okay for a little bit, but I soon found the hard difficulty to be trivial at best. This game is just way too easy, which I think is a big missed opportunity because it feels like this game is targeting an older, more nostalgic Nickelodeon audience than most previous Nicktoons games. I think the biggest issues with the difficulty stem from the leveling, as well as the game's economy. You level up way too fast here. Firstly, you stop learning new attacks at level 16, a level that you'll probably hit about 3 hours into the game. Essentially, you just stop caring about leveling up like less than halfway through the main campaign because you stop getting meaningful, tangible rewards. The level cap goes all the way to 40, so you're still leveling up your stats, but you're not unlocking anything, and that kinda takes away a lot of the enjoyment. And then the game's gold economy is way off. I had way too much money in Dice of Destiny at all times. There literally wasn't a single moment where I couldn't just buy whatever I wanted, which also contributed to the easy difficulty. After completing each dungeon, or maybe it's when I leveled up, I'm really not too sure, Carl's shop would always have a stronger version of each character's weapon available, as well as some better armor. Each time I was able to buy this without issue, and I feel like it definitely contributed to the non-existent challenge. Dice of Destiny very quickly settles into a rhythm of fighting through dungeons, getting to a boss battle, winning, and then unlocking a new character, as well as moving on to a new set of dungeons. The first character you unlock is Susie, who just sort of randomly shows up after the first boss battle. It's a poor introduction, and unfortunately a lot of the unlocked characters don't actually get much narrative to support how or why they have now shown up. But it is right around this time that Dice of Destiny's story really starts to unfold. The Flame Fatale, consisting of Ember, Azula, and Angelica, show up for the first time, and they make it known that they're trying to nab the Dice of Power for their mysterious master. You then unlock Jimmy, and this is where the game starts to get weird when they kind of pick and choose when they want to reference or allude to Nicktoons Unite existing. Jimmy and Timmy interact as if they've never met before, which is weird on multiple levels because you also have the Jimmy-Timmy Power Hour crossovers as well. We then move on to the TMNT themed world, which is also when you start amassing a decent number of NPCs in the Tangle. And honestly, I think the NPCs genuinely being involved in the game's story is what makes this feel like a huge and important crossover. They'll give you side quests and then actually show up in cutscenes as well, so they feel like a big part of the game rather than just an obligation to include, which is how it felt in some of the Unite games. The next character we get is Danny, and this is where the allusion to Nicktoons Unite gets weird. They make a bunch of wink wink, nudge nudge references to feeling like they've met before, which is cool, but it plays out a little awkward with the previous Jimmy and Timmy interaction. And in general, it just makes me wish they straight up acknowledged the existence of Nicktoons Unite. I'm not sure if there's some reason why they can't directly acknowledge it, but hey, I guess I'll take any references I can get. With Danny unlocked, we head to the Ghost Zone, where Jenny shows up randomly in the post-boss fight cutscene. I think this might have been an oversight from the devs, because she's just standing in this group shot before eventually being introduced later. It's from this next portion where I think the game, and clearly the devs, started running out of a bit of steam. At this point in the game, all characters are unlocked, and you've had access to all character skills for what feels like an eternity. The last major pull driving you through the game are the boss battles, the mystery surrounding the narrative, and the next locations you get to explore. Unfortunately, that last one sort of fizzles out. The next area you go to is just some generic prehistoric volcanic area, which is pretty lame. You then head to the Fire Nation, which is cool, before going to Fairy World. Side note, this is where I hit max character level with 2 worlds still left in the campaign. This causes another issue as I no longer had any incentive to even fight enemies. I was max level and I had all of the abilities, so it didn't make sense to do anything other than run to the end of dungeon portal. Annoyingly, beating Fairy World unlocks more Fairy World. One thing to know going into this game is that it is heavily skewed towards Fairly Odd Parents. You know how the final Unite game was called SpongeBob featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom? Well, this game could easily be renamed Fairly Odd Parents featuring Nicktoons The Dice of Destiny, because it's first and foremost a Timmy Turner narrative. This final world also feels like the devs were either rushed or just running out of steam. They start adding strange things like a bunch of invincible cannons that weirdly turn the levels into bullet hell shmups, and the levels in this final world straight up reuse giant chunks of levels that you've visited previously, which makes it feel so repetitive. It's such a damn shame that this happens right at the finale, because everything prior to this is so good. This is usually the part of the review where I would then tack on a section where I whinge and moan about the boss battles. You know me, I'm the #1 boss battle hater on the internet, but surprisingly, the boss battles here are pretty good. The first boss battle against Plankton was a decent challenge, and I kinda loved that he's the only boss in the game that the Nicktoons decide to bring back to the Tangle, just to have him imprisoned.
The thing that boys have to go through. Being chained up all the time or something.
The second boss battle was against Angelica, who commands a creepy as hell spider Cynthia, and she was even more of a challenge to the point where I suffered my first, and one of my only, deaths in the game. Unfortunately, this is the point where the game's difficulty started losing control, and every boss battle after this was just laughably easy. You've got Snake Karai that I stomped with Jimmy, Ember who I embarrassed with Leo, the Dirty Bubble who was a real random appearance and promptly defeated, Azula who wasn't even remotely a challenge, and then an evil Jorgen to round out the boss battles. Despite these boss battles being really easy, the actual ideas behind them were almost always really cool, and if they had a better difficulty, they would have been a whole lot of fun. For me, it took around 8 hours to beat, but that was with my focus being entirely on the main quest line. You'll get a bit more out of the game if you chip away at the side quests, although that will probably just worsen the difficulty issues. After sitting on it for a little bit, I have 100% confidence when I say this. Nicktoons and the Dice of Destiny is the best narrative ever for a Nicktoons game. No other Nicktoons game even comes close. Sure, it doesn't have the flashy 3D cutscenes of the Unite series, but in terms of telling a compelling narrative that actually makes sense, Dice of Destiny is so far ahead of any other Nicktoons game. The amount of character interactions we get here is an absolute treat. The game is filled with great humor and genuine writing for all of the shows represented, and it's so obvious that this is easily the most effort that has ever been put into a narrative for a Nicktoons game. This is genuinely a dream come true. As I do with every Nicktoons crossover, we have to put the actual crossover elements themselves under the microscope. I think they've done a superb job with the crossover here. Sure, I always wish that the roster was larger, but they fleshed out 9 genuinely fun playable characters, they included a bunch of representation through NPCs who actually play a role in the game, and then you get even more representation through the villains, boss battles, and the worlds themselves. One of the more annoying aspects of Battle for Volcano Island and Attack of the Toybots is that they lean too hard into unique settings instead of familiar locations. Dice of Destiny has the best of both worlds by adapting the show locations into a Dungeons & Dragons theme. The game unfortunately doesn't go beyond the 8 shows represented via playable characters, at least as far as I could tell, which I guess is the biggest knock on the crossover elements. It would have been really cool to see characters from other shows pop up through NPCs. Also, as I mentioned, it really sucks that one of the worlds is wasted on a generic theme, and the final world just rehashes Fairy World again. It's especially baffling when Rugrats, My Life as a Teenage Robot, and Jimmy Neutron don't get their own themed worlds. Looking at the overall presentation of the game, Dice of Destiny is an interesting one. We're obviously used to only ever seeing the Nicktoons crossover in 3D, unless it's on a handheld, so it was interesting seeing everybody brought into the same 2D style. I think all of the characters look pretty natural here, and it probably helps that they all have a central uniting Dungeons & Dragons theme to tie everything together. At first, I was a bit turned off by the cutscene art style. It's a bit basic and does feel low budget, but it grew on me more throughout the game, to the point where it no longer stood out to me. In-game, on the other hand, looks great. I was particularly impressed the first time I went to the Tangle. It's just a fantastic art style that works really well for me. And speaking of the Tangle, God did I love the theme for this area. And in general, the game's composer, Carlos Aguilar, did a superb job with the soundtrack. It's very similar to the art style, where he's taken familiar vibes and themes from each show's soundtrack, and then mashed it up with medieval theming. Last, and certainly not least, we've got the voice acting. The fact that every bit of dialogue is voiced in this game blew my mind. There is so much talking here, and all of it is voiced. Now, some of the voices we know and love are absent. Like, I was so confused when Zuko showed up, and it clearly wasn't Dante Bosco. But the fact that they went the whole way with voice acting is truly appreciated. Nick fans love this, so I'm sure it's going to be massively appreciated. Probably my only major negative with the presentation is that there can be a lot of visual clutter on the screen. There are just way too many HUD elements, with a map, your character stats, currently equipped abilities, and quest markers all taking up screen real estate. Then you'll have other things pop up, like if you have a potion's effects currently running, and that just adds to the problem. This gets particularly bad if you take on side quests, as these sit in your quest marker section permanently until completed. You can turn off the quest markers, but then this also stops displaying where you're supposed to go in your current level. My recommendation is to only take on side quests that you're going to complete immediately. This is the best Nicktoons game ever made. It nails almost every single aspect, and the only major flaw is that the final world feels like it was rushed. The crossover is nailed, there's a clear appreciation for Nicktoons and Nicktoons Unite lore, and overall, it's just a genuinely good game to play. If they'd named this Nicktoons Unite Dice of Destiny, it would have been a worthy revival of the Nicktoons Unite series. I couldn't possibly rank this game anywhere else. Nicktoons and the Dice of Destiny is an S-tier game. I cannot overstate what an incredible job was done on this game. It somehow captures the spirit and essence of the Nicktoons Unite series, while also bringing a brand new, unfamiliar genre of game to the Nicktoons. The love and care put into this game is so obviously on show here, and as somebody who leans more heavily towards Cartoon Network than Nickelodeon, it really makes me wish something like this existed for Cartoon Network. Nicktoons and the Dice of Destiny is a must-play for every Nickelodeon fan.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nicktoons MLB.
Cartoon crossovers are one of my favorite things in the world, and as a Nickelodeon fan, we've really been blessed over the years. Since their first experiment with a crossover with Nicktoons Racing, the releases have been coming pretty consistently, and we've been so lucky that since the revival of crossovers in 2018, we've basically just been getting banger games. Except, funnily enough, Nickelodeon Kart Racers 1, which was the game that kicked that revival off. If we look at the tier ranking, I've got two clear standouts: Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis and Nicktoons and the Dice of Destiny. For me, I think Dice of Destiny is the clear number one out of all of these games. I'd even have it as number 1 over all of the Nicktoons Unite games. A lot of people are probably shocked to hear that. Almost as shocked as hearing how much I love Nickelodeon Extreme Tennis. I'd love to know how many of my viewers have ever actually played that game. Hell, I'd love to know how many had even heard of the game before this video. Let me know in the comments. Extreme Tennis is a genuinely fun Mario Tennis clone that really deserved better than being stuck on Apple Arcade. At the other end of the scale, Nickelodeon Party Blast and Nickelodeon Kart Racers are fighting it out for the worst Nick crossover game. These two games are both very different kinds of bad. Nick Kart Racers is the low budget, low effort type of bad, so I have to give it the dubious honour of worst Nick crossover game over Party Blast. The tiny roster and dodgy feeling of the racing makes it such a terrible experience, and I'm genuinely shocked that this kicked off a new wave in Nick crossover games. I've got to thank all of you who apparently bought this game at launch and forced Nick to invest actual budget into these things. What's your dream Nick crossover game? Let me know in the comments below. And make sure you hit like, subscribe so you catch all of my upcoming videos, including part 2 of every SpongeBob game ranked. And you can also hype the video, apparently that's a thing on YouTube now. I have no idea how it works, so let me know when you guys figure it out. But until next time, later.